Welcome back from town meeting week. We're here in Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. And today we're going to be starting with our labor bills and some of the concerns we wanted to clean up or talk about further with Damien and Sophie, and to have some committee discussion on where people are with some of them and what we need to further flesh out. And it's great to see you all. I hope you had a restoring town meeting week. Keisha, it's good to see you. Randy and David. Tom will join us as soon as he's able. He's driving back from a meeting in Boston.
So I'm here. If it's okay with everybody, I'm just listening and folding laundry and holding this baby, but I'm going to go off video so I'm not shaking, my phone or whatever all over the place. So.
Okay, great. Good. It's great to see you. And so Sophie, remind us, and Damien, would you be kind enough? We are going to talk with Damien. We had a couple issues that we were going to further explore with Damien. And Sophie, would you be kind enough to just remind us of those?
Yeah, so this is the proposed bill 2025 0912. It's the Vermont Department of Labor Technical Corrections Bill.
Right.
And included in the first couple of sections of the bill is language regarding rulemaking. And when we walked through the bill, there were questions around the proposed language. And I think one of the questions was, does anyone else do this? What the approach that's being proposed here. And so the committee was interested in talking to Damien, given his experience with LCAR and many other things.
Right. And I am trying to find that draft.
Can you say the draft number again, please?
Yes, it's 250912.
It's 0192. And I only have the three. I don't think.
It's draft number 1.3 dated February 26, 2025.
I'm embarrassed to say I didn't have it clipped with my other labor bills.
Be right back. It's 913, not 912.
It's 912.
It is 912. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
I have it right here. Great. Hold on one sec. I have it somewhere else. I have 912. Great. Terrific. Okay. Great. And
was it emailed to us by?
Yeah.
Was it Megan or
Megan? Megan
yesterday?
Just left the room. She'll be right back.
Okay, so one of the emails from Megan yesterday, right? Something like that.
Megan, Keisha has a question for you. Thanks. I just, of course, found it. Damien, we had questions. Sophie, remind me, we had this expedites the formal rule, section 2.
Right, section 1 and section 2. So right now the Department of Labor is required to follow formal rulemaking to adopt updated federal worksite safety standards.
Right.
Even though the state's required to adopt those standards. So the proposed change would allow the Department of Labor to adopt the minimum standards without going through the full formal rulemaking process.
Right. Right. And I guess the question is, this is sort of expedited rulemaking, which as you staff LCAR, Damien, are there other, the lottery does this as well, that when there's a federal rule that's handed down, they are also able to expedite rulemaking. Is that right? You're muted, Damien.
How about now?
Nope, you're live now. I can hear you.
Great. For the record, I'm Damien Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. It's wonderful to be back in this committee for the first time this year.
It's wonderful to have you.
And so this is, it's not very usual to have an expedited rulemaking process, but it's not unprecedented. We have two provisions in our law that I can think of off the top of my head, which I've provided to Megan, and they're posted to your website. The first is that for the state lottery, we adopted a provision for multi-jurisdictional lottery games, which is
Right.
Powerball, Mega Millions, Lucky for Life, that allows them to adopt procedures to govern the establishment and operation of those games. And basically what we're doing is we're calling the rules for those games procedures instead of calling them rules and putting them under the formal Administrative Procedure Act for rulemaking and adoption. And the reason we did that with those is the multi-jurisdictional lotteries are, they often hand down rules with I forget what the exact time period is, but it's like a 60 or 90-day adoption window for the states that participate. And if you cannot update your rules within that period, the state has to stop selling tickets until it updates the rules. So after years of the Lottery Commission submitting emergency rules to fill the gap, so that they wouldn't miss out on months of sales, we adopted this provision here to say, because they're just adopting the rules verbatim. So that makes it a somewhat analogous case. The other provision that we have is actually in our emergency rulemaking provisions. We do allow an entity to adopt emergency rules if the federal government is requiring those rules to be adopted on an expedited basis, or a multi-state entity is requiring that. So, and essentially it gives the entities authority to adopt an emergency rule for the gap and meet the emergency rulemaking requirements, which normally would require some sort of imminent threat to public health, safety, or welfare. But in this case, we say that can be met if there's a federal statute or rule or a multi-jurisdictional or a multi-state entity program that requires the rule to be adopted faster. You can meet it with an emergency rule, but then they still have to adopt a permanent rule. And the emergency rule just fills the gap. And then I think we do have other instances, for example, with Fish and Wildlife, where the federal government hands down what are called bag limits on how many of a certain migratory species can be taken each year during the hunting season. But they hand those down so close to hunting season that the state has to adopt things on an expedited basis. This situation is a little bit different because with the VOSHA rules, they're not necessarily adopted on an expedited basis. But it is similar in that what we've seen over the years is because Vermont's Occupational Safety and Health Agency or administration within the Department of Labor is so small that they don't really have the staff to undertake extensive rulemaking or adopt their own standards in lieu of the federal standards, that what the state does is it just adopts the federal standards essentially verbatim. The only substitutions that are made are things like mailing addresses for the state entity. And when we're reviewing the rules, it has gotten to the point where, to ensure the rules comply with the statute, when I was in Sophie's position, the way I reviewed the rules was to simply do a document comparison to ensure that the documents matched up verbatim, because that was their authority under our statute. And then, so I think the language in front of you proposes to give them the ability to adopt a rule under an expedited procedure where they would essentially say we're adopting the VOSHA standard for respiratory protection or fall protection or something like that. And then provide notice to interested parties, and then 30 days for comment and an opportunity for the rule to be pushed into rulemaking if there is an objection to it. What happens with the VOSHA standards is that typically all of those objections are worked out at the federal level, and we hear little to nothing about it at LCAR. But this does, you do have a safety valve in here in the language that Sophie's drafted that would allow it to get pushed into the rulemaking process, which is realistically, it's a 6 to 8 month process with public comment, and there has to be, so for example, if there are objections to the rule language, the Department of Labor would have to go point by point with the objections in their filing documents to LCAR and say, we made changes based on this objection, but we didn't make changes based on this objection, and this is why. And then LCAR has a chance to review that and say, well, does this comply with the statute and with legislative intent? But that is the only instance here. So what you'd be losing in this case is for most of these rules, you would be losing the chance for the more detailed sort of notice and comment rulemaking process, and the opportunity for LCAR to review to determine if it's consistent with legislative intent and with the statutory authority of the department. What you would be gaining for the department is really some efficiencies in their process. And I'll let the department advocate for itself, but what you have proposed here is really looks like a 30 to 45 day process instead of a 6 to 8 month process. So from a process standpoint, it's certainly a shortened process. It does take out some opportunity for review. We do not have many of these exceptions. So one thing you want to ask yourself is, do you want to start making exceptions to the rulemaking process, which provides for legislative oversight? And I can't tell you what the right answer to that is. In this case, the legislative oversight, I'm not aware in my time here of any time that LCAR has objected to a VOSHA rule, because VOSHA, for every rule in the 11 years I've been here, every VOSHA rule has simply been to adopt the federal standard. And to the best of my knowledge, VOSHA has never adopted anything but the federal standards. The state has never adopted its own standard on any of these issues, although it does have the authority to do so. But you'll notice that in the language on page 3, it does provide that for any rule or standard proposed that is more protective of health and safety than the
Line
federal
8.
standard,
Yeah.
the commissioner shall basically go through the regular rulemaking process. I'm realizing as I read this that you would also want to add in the language, if you go forward with this language, or for which there is no corresponding federal standard, then you would also require that.
So you've never seen us change our VOSHA rule, and you said most of the VOSHA rules, the objections are worked out at the federal level before they even.
Yeah, so what typically happens is federal OSHA goes through a multi-year rulemaking process where they hear from the national industry stakeholders who represent the industry groups that might be affected. So right now, for example, We talked about this a little bit last year. There is a standard that they're revising that governs the PPE worn by fire departments. And they're currently in the notice and comment process where they're receiving comments from around the country from fire departments of various sizes saying, this part of the rule looks okay, this part of the rule looks problematic, and here's why. And then they're considering whether to revise that. When they adopt that rule, the clock starts for OSHA to adopt, or VOSHA to adopt a corresponding rule. And then OSHA, or VOSHA, excuse me, Vermont Occupational Safety and Health, will, in every instance that I'm aware of, will simply adopt the federal rule, although they do have the ability to adopt something that's more protective.
Sorry.
But yeah, in this case, all of those issues would have been worked out at the federal level, and VOSHA is just saying we're going to adopt the federal rule, which we're required to have a rule at least as protective. If VOSHA ever decided not to adopt the federal rule, we could lose our state plan, which would mean the federal government would regulate occupational safety and health in the state rather than the State Department of Labor.
Right. So we're not going to do that.
Right. So
with this circumstance, I mean, David, as you know, now serves on LCAR, so it would be interesting to hear him weigh in on this. But given that we have some similar areas where we have sidestepped full LCAR review, it sounds like this would be a first, just greenlighting it. Does it make any sense to build in a review to see how it's going?
I'm not sure if I can tell you whether it makes sense or not. You could certainly put in a sunset for the change, where it would revert back to the pre-existing law unless you repealed that sunset. And that would give you a chance to take testimony on this in a couple of years to see how it's going. Because
it strikes me this makes sense. It saves the department money. They testified to that and time, and it's certainly much more efficient. Given if they are adopting them verbatim, it makes sense to enable this. But it might, given your testimony, it might make some sense for us to be able to review it in how many years do you think it would? I mean, how often does VOSHA? How often do the feds send down things like this? I mean, with this administration, who knows? But
it really it varies. But if you give me just a second here, I will let you know how many rules we got in the last biennium that were.
Oh, that would be great, because then we could. I mean, if people were willing, I'm willing to try this because it sounds like it makes lots of sense. But it may make some sense to review it also. David, while Damien looks it up, any thoughts from you who serve on LCAR?
Yeah, I don't have any apprehension about the intent here.
Okay. So the intent is to make it much more efficient and save a lot of time from 30 to 45 days as opposed to 6 to 8 months, right, Damien? That's sort of the main objective, I think. And
the department could probably give you a better sense of exactly what that timeline looks like. That's just my back of the napkin estimate.
Yeah, that's what they testified, that it would save quite a bit of time.
Let me ask just a final question to make sure that I understand what we're doing. The only effect of the change that we're talking about right now is the expediting of the application and the installation of the application, but there are no other substantive changes. Is that correct?
I'm
So
not.
is that right?
Yeah.
Sophie, go ahead. Thanks.
No, I was going to say, yeah, the intent is that they're able to adopt the federal rule that comes down, and only if they are making changes to that rule to be more protective would they, and then the language would require them to go through the regular formal rulemaking process. But if they're just simply adopting word for word what's coming down, you know, from the federal side, then they would be able to use this expedited process. But I also take Damien's point in that if they were to if VOSHA or the Department of Labor wanted to go into a new area that's not covered by a rule coming down from the federal government, that there probably should be language included here that would have to go through the full formal rulemaking process.
And Randy, anything further?
No, and I'm assuming that clarifying language would be done at this point to affect exactly what Sophie is saying.
Yes, and Damien has that language, which I assume he will get to Sophie.
Okay.
Because you sort of were saying it out loud, but if you'd be kind enough, Damien, to get that to Sophie, that would be great.
Yeah,
What-
Sophie and I can work on that language together. Are you voting the bill out today or?
No,
this
no,
week?
no. We'll probably vote it out Thursday. The
Okay.
hope is to vote it out Thursday or as soon as we can.
Great. So
And
yeah,
can I also
Sophie and I can
assume-
get that language cleaned up for you.
Can I also assume that there have been no objections raised by any other party to this
Right.
change?
And so far we have heard no other objections to any piece of this bill.
I guess one question that I have about a number of the things that we're doing.
Wait
Is
a minute.
the-
Can you just, before we leave these sections, is this on sections 1 or 2?
This is on the entire bill.
Okay, can you just wait, because Damien was looking up how many rules actually they adopted in the last biennium. Just so we have a notion of if we do a sunset, if that's a smart thing to do and then review it. I think sometimes it's just good to review how things are working before we make it permanent.
Yeah, I'm looking here and I'm not, unfortunately, not finding a great listing of the number of rules that were submitted. Let me just see. I'm gonna look under.
It's a question we could also ask the commissioner.
Yeah, and I could find it with a little bit more time. I know we had at least one rule last biennium which required some changes to correct some language that was inadvertently deleted from the text that they sent to LCAR. But let's just see. But unfortunately, the way they're listed on LCAR's webpage doesn't list the agency right off the top here. So that is causing me some trouble in finding the actual number for you.
So maybe if Sophie, if you and Damien could coordinate on that additional language that Damien sort of began to draft as he was speaking earlier. And I don't know how the rest of the committee, how do you feel about sunsetting this provision? And we can fill in the time on sunsetting it depending on how many rules were reviewed in the last few years. But, you know, maybe review it in three or 4 years and then they could make it permanent, unless you're fine with making it permanent now. But I think it might make some sense to look and see how it's working. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'm fine with that approach. For the sunset.
Shorter rather than a longer sunset would be my
Yeah.
vote.
And so I think for me, that sort of depends on Damien giving us a notion of how many rules
Right,
actually
understood.
2 or 3 year period.
Yep, and I am I'm doing an alternative search right now, so
Great.
hopefully I
and
can make that for you.
If we do a sunset in 3 years, it would be good to probably say what we'd like to see in 3 years, and we'd like to see, you know, how much time it's saved, how much money it's saved, and how quickly it's, you know, it's enabled, you know, how efficient the expediting, how effective it's actually been. Sophie, you okay with that if we add that?
Sure.
Keisha, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I went to get, did you say my name just now?
Yeah, I did. I
Okay.
just asked because David and Randy weighed in on the idea of these expedited rules, you know, because
Oh,
it would
yes.
be, you know, give it sort of some time to see how it works and have them do a sunset of like 3 years and see how it's working.
Yes. Yeah.
so
And I just worry, you know, like time wise, I'm ready to be, you know, do whatever we need to. It's been
Yeah.
like a sixth of our time. So yeah. I think, are you looking for more agreement on the whole bill?
No, in a sec, yes, but just on this rulemaking area,
Yes.
people were concerned about. I just think we might as well give it a chance to be more efficient, see how it works, and then sunset it and look at it.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Did you say 3 years?
Well, it's sort of we're waiting for Damien to weigh in with how many rules actually they did in the last 2 or
So
3.
in the last 3 years, there have been 3 rules.
Ah,
So there was one submitted in 2022 and 2 submitted in 2024. And prior to that, there was 1 submitted in 2019. And then the database at the Secretary of State's website doesn't go back further than that, but that allowed me to find the rule submissions in the last few years. So,
okay.
yeah, and with those rules, like I mentioned, there was one instance that I was able to find from the last biennium where there were some minor typographical corrections. Because what's happening now essentially is that the department, when they prepare their documents for LCAR, has to cut and paste the federal rule into a new document to
Oh.
show the track changes. And there was some text that was lost when they did that for one of the rules they submitted last biennium. The intent being to adopt the full federal rule. When we've caught these issues in the past, and to my knowledge, it's been the couple of issues I can remember have all related to this cut and paste to prepare
Oh.
the documents for the whole LCAR and Secretary of State submission. That has created issues.
So round peg into our square hole is causing them challenges.
Yeah, one other thing I do want to note for the committee, and this is something when Sophie and I were discussing the rule, is that I would also recommend, I overlooked this when Sophie and I were discussing the language around the rulemaking, is that you do want to add language regarding them filing the final rule with the Secretary of State for adoption, so that it actually gets put in the Vermont Code of Rules. And so I'll work with Sophie on that too. But we want to avoid having an instance where the adopted rule is not filed.
Yeah, doesn't get filed. Great. I think if that's okay, let's move ahead with that and then we'll ask the commissioner if that works for them. Is that okay with those 2 sections, everybody?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Damien, did you have, and Sophie and Damien, did you have other areas that Damien was going to weigh in on?
Nope, that was it. Thank you so much, Damien.
Great. Thank you, Sophie.
Damien, thanks. Very helpful.
All right. Have a good one. Good luck with the rest of your meeting today.
Okay, thanks. Randy, I think you were, I had some questions about the rest of the bill.
I had an overarching question regarding the fact that we're dealing with something that has a draft request number and not a bill number. And I want to make sure that I understand the rationale for being where we are. And in particular, what concerns me is the public being aware of what we're doing by using this particular method as opposed to a bill, which people typically look things up by. Are we perhaps inadvertently making it less likely that people will know what we're doing and what we're voting on?
So it will have a number the minute, it's a committee bill. It's posted on our website, has been since they introduced it and since Sophie turned it into a draft. It was never presented to us as a bill. The department came to us with a request and a draft. Sophie then drafted into form that we can review it in.
Sure,
So
it's a draft request, but it doesn't
and
have
it's been
a
discussed.
filter, and that's typically what people will look for when they're searching for something. When people are searching to know, are we doing something in the labor area, are most people going to find this draft in their search?
I think that people who are interested in these specific issues, because I've had some reach out on our other drafts, on the housing draft, on the economic development bill, and on some other things, on the other things that we have as drafts, on the other labor bills that are drafted. And people have weighed in because the subject has been publicly included on our agenda, and the draft bills are on our website.
Sure. I
So-
mean, you will look at a search, for example, of the subject matter, may or may not turn it up. I haven't tried to do a search, but I'm just wondering because I don't see this as a method being used often. Is it?
Well, we use it a lot in this committee because we have traditionally done a number of committee bills by pulling a lot of work together into one bill. And given our time frame, this seemed, speaking of efficiency, this seemed to be the most efficient way to proceed given our time frame. Because as you and I both know, bills have taken a long time this session to get introduced. And so this was the efficient way of our actually getting them drafted and up for the public to see as drafts.
Can I also just
Other members of
say,
the committee, do you have any thoughts? Other members of the committee, do you have some of the same concerns I have or not?
I'll just say that what I was going to add, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair, is we can always vote something out and pull it back in. So if we felt generally okay with something, but we knew we wanted a couple more days, we can vote it out so it has a number and then keep working on it.
Thank you, Keisha. That's a good reminder.
Good point.
We can absolutely do that. But Sophie, you were going to say something. Sorry.
No, this is my first go round, so I have no
Oh, I thought you
no
were.
advice on this.
No,
I mean, I'm happy to do whatever the committee wants me to do. So as long as you give me instruction on what you want me to do with this bill, I can make sure that I have it ready, for Thursday for
so we
whatever
could.
action you want to take.
Great. Terrific. Yes, it sounds like you and Damien will work on this. Any other concerns about this bill? Because I think, and then Sophie, the next draft would incorporate S6 too, which we talked about.
So S6 is already in here.
In 912?
Yes, it's section 5
Oh, all right, that's section 5. Okay, great.
on page 5. The other thing I wanted to flag though was that on page 6, line 6, and this is to do with the notice of layoffs.
Right.
There was discussion at the last committee
Yeah.
meeting around the number of employees. And so the current draft says that it would be that they would need to provide notice if the action is going to affect 25 or more employees. And there was some discussion about reducing that. So again, if I'm making these other changes, I just want to have clarity on if that changed.
I think you saw the commissioner's response, and I'll send it to everybody. But I haven't been able to access my Ledge email for a bit, which is frustrating. But the commissioner responded saying that they wanted to just, I think you saw that, Sophie, he was fine with taking it to 20 so that we're consistent with our small business numbers that this committee is looking at, small businesses 20 and under. And they were fine with going to 20. They didn't want to go lower than that. So
Right.
they were fine with taking it to 20. I think you were on that email chain, Sophie, yes?
I was.
Is that a fair?
Yeah, I could find the email if that would be helpful.
Yeah, if you, that would be great, if you. And then, if you're in a position to forward it to everybody, that would be great.
Madam Chair,
Okay.
is it your intent to go through each of the bills on a section by section basis today?
Mostly to focus in this first hour on some of the labor concerns. I think that from what I've gotten feedback from most of you is that the technical corrections, other than this concern, that Damien just helped us clarify, is that you were mostly okay with the technical corrections bill, and we have had I have had not a single email about it.
Yeah. Well, that's one of my questions is does the public know enough to email about it? Can they find it?
Well, I in all fairness, Randy, I do the technical corrections bill every year in GovOps, and I have never had a comment on it.
Well, right, because nobody knows what it is.
Well, they do. I mean, it's
All right. I understand, but as I say, that was one of my concerns. I think
it's a good concern, and the minute we have it, we vote it out, it will have a number, and it will be a committee bill.
Okay. I do have one question about another section of the bill. And again, you go where you want to go, and then when we get to it, if we don't, I'll raise it.
Okay. Anything else on this technical corrections bill? The 912 draft. I think it's draft 1.3. Is that right, Sophie?
That's correct.
So these are as I recall, we were all mostly fine with this.
Yep. There's just one issue in the bill that in reading it a fifth or sixth time that just came to my attention. Now I can't even find the section, but I think Sophie, you'll know the section I mean, and that is in the case of willful misconduct by the employer, in which the employer willfully reduces the amount of money or the amount that ultimately would be paid. Does that ring a bell?
You mean the penalties are not in this bill, they're in a different bill.
Are they?
Yeah, that was not something that the Department of Labor was looking for as a technical correction. That's in 25,652.
That's in the biggest of our labor bills that we're going to probably go to next if we have some time.
You're thinking of the testimony from Kelly Mazzacott about that? Because that was Bill 652, 25.
Yeah, I was just looking from reading through the bills over the weekend, and it indicates that the employer would pay a penalty, and that penalty, in effect, it could be a double penalty, half of which would go to the person being victimized and half of which would go to the department for its administrative expenses.
Oh, okay. That was a different thing. Sorry, I thought you were talking about the phase penalties for workers' comp, delay and getting it out. Right. This was
comp section. Right.
Right. No, but I know what you're talking about now. This was, let me just double check here.
That was in this bill.
Yes, it's section 3. It's on page 4.
Okay. Let me get that.
And this was to do, it was to clarify, it's in the middle of page 4. So once the commissioner has recovered the wages, so the employee who's not received all the wages they should have received will receive that, will be compensated. This section deals with if the unpaid wages were willfully withheld.
That's it. That's the section.
Yeah, and that provides that one half of any additional amount that's recovered above the employee's unpaid wages would go to the employee, and the other half would be retained by the commissioner.
Yeah, and let's see. It says determines where willfully the order may provide that the employer is liable to pay an additional amount. And the question that I have is, why do we use the word may? Why is it to appear to be optional as opposed to mandatory? Why does it say may instead of shall?
I don't see, that's not part of their language change that they're asking
I know
for.
it's not part of the language change, but as you read the language, my question is, shouldn't it be?
I mean, that would be a policy decision
But
for the committee, yeah.
You know, this goes to issues that we've discussed in this committee over the past several years. That when employers commit violations that penalize employees and that result in the employer, in effect, getting something for it, why do we allow them to do it without punishment? Why shouldn't it be shall if they do it? Because this has to be willful, not accidental.
Right, I get it. I would suggest that we ask the commissioner if they would be willing to shift that may to a shall. Is that okay, Randy, if we email?
That would be okay for me as a minimum, because as I say, we've discussed this for several years, in which people have taken effectively millions of dollars. The number, in fact, of is very, very high, and we've looked at that before, and it seems to be penalty free. And now, for it to be discretionary, I'm just concerned about that. Or continues to be discretionary.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we could be efficient and actually see, Megan, if we were able to email the commissioner or Rowan, maybe Rowan is listening in. Tap 3 times, Rowan, if you're listening. And maybe we could ask in real time so that we could clarify that now. And
What section is that?
it is section 3 of their miscellaneous bill, which is draft 912. And it is the investigation of complaints of unpaid wages. And it would be great if we could get in real time the commissioner here. That's line 6. And Randy, any other concerns with the technical corrections?
That's the only one that leaps out at me.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing it out. David, you okay with the rest of it?
Good.
Yeah. Keisha, you
I do
okay?
agree with,
Yes.
do agree with Randy's comment.
Right.
Yeah, I always rely on Randy to read things extremely carefully. So I appreciate that too.
Right. So we'll see. Okay, then I think once we get that comment from that clarified with the commissioner, we might be ready to actually, we could conceivably vote it out this afternoon if you wanted, because Thomas is also, I think, fine with the technical corrections.
Do you need to have the amendment in front of you to
Yes,
vote on it?
I think we can't vote it out today because we need Damien's and your word.
Right.
But I think it would be great, and we'll ask the commissioner for this to weigh in on that, mayor shall. And I think then we'll be ready to go, and we might be able to vote it out earlier once we get your language with Damien's.
Well, if you'd like to take Senator Brock's concern to heart, we could always vote it out pending those changes, just so it has a number and people can weigh in before we finalize.
And by the way, if someone is concerned that double the amount might be too much, there may be extenuating circumstances, the commissioner still has the ability to lower that amount from twice, because he still has the statement is liable to pay an additional amount not to exceed twice the amount. So there's still flexibility there.
Yeah. So we have three possible changes. And I'm happy to consider doing a provisional, voting it out just so that we could then get a bill number. That's fine by me. But they're contingent on, and I don't know what Sophie and Damien's timeframe is and how quickly we could get that done. But the three changes I see are the Damien's additions that Damien and Sophie are going to work on, the sunset edition, and this may or shall. Any other? I think those are the three we're talking about, right?
And the mini WARN Act, the number of employees.
Oh, right, and the shifting the number of employees to 20. 4. Those are the 4 changes. So I would be happy to entertain a motion if somebody wanted to make that, and then we could, as soon as we. I mean, the thing is, we could probably get those in the next day or so. Anyway, what's the committee's pleasure?
Fine, do it.
Okay, great. Then I'd entertain a motion to pass it with those 4 changes that we would review, obviously, but that we would get those incorporated and get it.
I move we pass it with the amendments that we haven't yet made.
Well, that we have talked about and agreed to.
You
But
see
we
what I'm saying?
passed this draft number or whatever.
Yeah.
It is, right? I don't know what the draft number is.
The draft number is 0912 and it would be draft 1.4. Sophie, is that right?
It is draft 1.3. It would become, I guess it would be 1.4, but right now it's 250912. And I don't know how that mechanism works. I mean, usually the bill number, the drafting request goes to the clerk and gets a bill number. I've never done it where it's come out of a committee this way, so I will have to figure that out.
Well, we'd vote out 1.3.
Right, that's
And-
what we have in front of us now is 1.3.
Exactly.
And so we're changing that. So it presumably would be 1.4, wouldn't it?
Correct. That's what I just asked her. And
Yeah.
Sophie said it would be 1.4. So
No, but we can't vote on
something we haven't
draft
seen.
that hasn't been written. So
Right.
the question is, do we want to vote out this draft, acknowledging that we will have
Make those 4 changes.
make those 4 changes and then pull it back in and make those 4 changes? That's the way we would do it if we wanted to.
Then if we're going to, given that we know we're making those 4 changes, I would suggest we wait one day and hopefully get those changes made and be able to vote it out as 1.4 tomorrow. Are people okay with that? Because then we at least have the changes we know we want before it goes out into in.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. This is Dave. But back to Randy's point, in the process, can we assign this a bill number so it can be
It
tracked
will
on
get a
a
bill
larger scale,
number the minute we vote it out with those 4 changes.
but not before?
No. But the public knows we're discussing this bill. It's on, it's on our website. So we're discussing labor issues today, and we have only 4 labor bills in front of us, so. And they each have a draft number. So thank you. And I think, so I think that's great. And I think if it's possible, Sophie, for us to have the next draft tomorrow, if that's possible, or first thing Wednesday morning, we can.
Yeah, I will do my best. I mean, I'm not sure what Damien's schedule is
Yeah.
like, and then obviously it's got to go through drafting operations, but I will get it to you as soon as I can.
Great, that would be terrific. Thank you. And Cameron hasn't, is Cameron in the waiting room? No. So I would suggest if the committee want, I think it would make some sense for us to look at one of our other labor bills. We have 3 other labor drafts that we're looking at. 652, 653, and 654. And the biggest one, of course, is 652. And I would love to. There are people who want to weigh in on we have other witnesses coming in to discuss the prevailing wage and to discuss, but there are lots of areas for discussion in this bill. So, Sophie, was there anything additional that we were going to add for today for discussion? I don't think so. Keisha, was there anything? I thought migrant justice was coming in. Are they coming?
I don't know the agenda.
The agenda, the migrant justice is coming in tomorrow.
Okay, so I guess today it would be good to know if anybody had any, major concerns about a section so that advocates on either side could be heard.
Right.
Because I don't think we've had the full totality of testimony on all of these.
We certainly haven't. We haven't had that time yet. We need, so people have weighed in, and I think it would be interesting just to briefly, cameras arrive. So if we give it sort of 5 or 10 minutes to go through and talk about some of these sections, at least initially, it would be great to get people's sense of where they are with this bill. 652 begins with extending the minimum wage to agricultural workers. It then addresses overtime for employees, making less than $1,128 a week, and overtime for ag workers that work more than 60 hours a week. Those three issues, we have not heard from the agricultural community on this much, although Randy and Keisha spent a large part of the summer and fall addressing this much more fully than we have. And from what I'm hearing, people are having some challenges with overtime, but seem to be willing to consider the minimum wage for agricultural workers. And so I would just love to hear where people are weighing in at the moment. Keisha and Randy, you want to start? You're the two that worked on this closely.
Well, we had frankly mixed commentary, and we had mixed commentary that at least for some of us, and our committee was somewhat split, I think, on the way we viewed it. And one of the concerns that I had myself is I was not entirely comfortable with what I heard about what people are being paid. There's one group who seemed to indicate that there were problems about payments. The payments were not always what they were held out to be. The minimum wage was not entirely being paid. And other groups who said that it was. And we didn't, frankly, have enough testimony that I considered reliable that gave me the answer one way or the other. And so I came away still unsure of what wage rates were in fact being paid. So that was problem one. What's happening in other states was also a concern because, again, it puts us somewhat in a minority were we to adopt this as we talk about. I don't know, Keisha, were you comfortable with everything you heard?
I was going to suggest, I think we could have dug in more on the overtime piece because that's new in a lot of states and they have found funds to cover the overtime cost. So, and I'm saying that because I think this would be a good bill to vote out preliminarily and pull back in with certain parts that are, maybe we're never going to find agreement removed, because I think on this minimum wage piece, what we heard is nobody wanted to come forward and say they're not. And the agricultural community would be surprised if anybody was paying less than minimum wage, because that would be, out of sync with their employment needs. But at the same time, I worry that those are maybe the exact people, the workers who are the least able to come forward and complain about the situation as well. So I would say if we could get the wage piece out and pull it back in, we'd find out real fast, if somebody had a problem with it. And I could, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. On the one hand, people don't want to admit committing a crime to the government, which is one of the reasons that I suspect we didn't hear
right
as we could have. And
Right.
I'm also concerned with the turmoil that's going on in Washington, particularly with deportations of workers who are not documented. This is going to escalate even further, no matter what we do.
Well, you're right. And I think that so much of what we're hearing right now is that someone who doesn't have documentation is safer from deportation if they are housed and they have their basic needs met, so that they aren't traveling to get help or support or in the emergency room all the time, or getting in trouble with the law in any way because they can't fix part of their car or whatever the case may be. So, you know, I think the antidote right now to that uncertainty in Washington is to give people the money they need to live and not seek other government and outside supports, potentially, even though minimum wage is quite low, in order to ensure that they don't have unnecessary reasons to expose themselves to law enforcement.
So this summer, did your task force hear from agricultural workers themselves, from Migrant Justice and from others?
We heard from some, but my sense is we heard from a limited number. Even the number that they counted was not a large number relative to the universe that we believe is here.
I think
that's one of the reasons why I was frankly uncomfortable with what I heard.
So my recollection, and Sophie remembers things a lot better than I do, but there were somewhere between 300 and 400 people who took the Migrant Justice survey, and a quarter of them reported making less than the minimum wage. And then the Dairy Alliance said that they surveyed about 20 of their members, and that most of them paid above minimum wage because they needed to be competitive, but they wouldn't really give us more details because of the nature of the political climate. So, I mean, really, I think I keep coming back to our state relies on these workers. You know, their safety and ability to remain in Vermont is a huge part of what makes our dairy industry function. So I would like to see them making, minimum wage, and nobody was coming forward to say they don't deserve it. Certainly that is the going rate. And, there are those who are far exceeding it, who are part of the Milk with Dignity program, who came forward to speak to us and say, we feel like we have a better working relationship with our employees because we're in the Milk with Dignity program. That was another dairy perspective that we heard. So that's kind of the sum of the testimony. And nobody said we oppose the minimum wage for dairy workers or farm workers. It was, we don't think anyone's making that, which then
it's the silence that was important, and a substantial portion of the population that could weigh in on this on either side was silent. And as a result, I don't have a whole lot of confidence in what we heard.
I know in our discussion we talked about but they're also paid these additional benefits of housing and
Yeah.
something. However, as we know, most of the housing is not exactly luxurious. That a lot of it is very basic. It's not like they're getting a benefit that really has. They aren't getting health care. I don't believe most of them. Did you hear that they were getting health care? So housing is the main benefit they're getting. And from my understanding with many of the agricultural workers is that housing is pretty modest, if not less,
Yeah, but we understand what rentals are for things.
I don't want to be disparaging. So I guess for me, the minimum wage piece makes absolute sense and is consistent with our piece in the technical corrections bill where we get rid of the sub-minimum wage for disabled workers, it does strike me that the sub-minimum wage is a thing of the past. It's pretty archaic that anybody, no matter what the industry, should be paying sub-minimum wage. I just don't get it. So
Did we have, by the way,
a value choice.
did we have any statistics about that?
In your
About
course?
Yeah, about
disability.
sub-minimum wage.
Well, that's what this is currently. The
No, I
average.
know, but aside from that, do we have any testimony or a statistic about who, if anybody, is receiving the sub-minimum wage at this point?
We've asked Matt Bearwitz for that for a couple years, but it was more, I think, are you asking,
In the task force, did you get that? Because that's what this is. I mean, in bringing them
Well,
up to wage.
I don't know if we're
No.
talking about a specific population or you're saying who's receiving like the minimum wage,
No, I'm talking about sub-minimum wage that we talked about in terms of people with disabilities and so on. And I don't recall, maybe I'm missing it, but I don't recall any testimony, at least convincing testimony, to give us information on that either.
Yes, that's why the Department of Labor was suggesting we just put it in the technical corrections bill because it does, the sub-minimum wage for disabled workers has never been used. It's
No.
not, we have a different wage for people who are employed through Voc Rehab, through developmentally disabled, through the Agency of Human Services. That's a different thing.
Mhm.
But the sub-minimum wage as it in statute now does not exist. I mean, has never been used for disabled workers in this state. So the question I have is the one place it does exist is in the agricultural world. So I assume that you got some statistics about that, or this summer when you had your task force.
I didn't consider this just what we heard. I didn't consider reliable.
I
Yes.
think nobody would at this point be able to come forward and say, these are the wages, that people are getting paid who have very different ways of getting paid in a broken immigration system, basically.
In a broken system.
But I'm understanding, Senator Brock, your discomfort. I'm not asking you to just wholesale, vote for this. But if we voted this piece out and not the overtime piece where we probably could do more work, if we just voted the wage piece out, even if someone came to you privately and said, this is what this would do, because I don't think anyone's going to tell us publicly how they feel about paying people less than the minimum wage, and you ultimately wanted to vote against it, I'd understand, but I think the only way to call it to question is to have it out there in bill form.
Okay. But so if we did that, there's a lot more in this bill for us to and from what I hear, we could green light the minimum wage piece, take the overtime pieces out and look at them after crossover and put them on a workforce bill if we need to. But we have not taken enough testimony on the overtime piece at all. But the minimum wage piece, it strikes me we could act on now. I mean, not today necessarily, but
But you can act on it from a state standpoint. You have the situation under the Fair Labor Standards Act, which we would also at least think about, that doesn't impose that requirement federally.
No, someone, no,
Okay.
MARC.
So it is now sort of after time with labor, and Pam is in the room and ready to go. Ellen is not yet in the room to talk about the manufactured home by right, but we do have Cam to go through the housing bill. What is the committee's pleasure? Because this is a much bigger, obviously the rest of the bill is a much bigger conversation. It has prevailing wage in it. I know we have a bunch of people coming to testify on that on Thursday. And it has the medical case management, the insurance piece of both for English as a second language and for sort of navigators for medical concerns with workers' comp. And it's got lots of
Correction, so on the corrections piece, which
and
also I think have discussion. My sense is that this is going to take a lot of work, and I'm not sure that I'm ready to do much of anything with it right now until we have more discussion and more testimony. I'm just concerned about the potential impact that we don't really have a lot of evidence on now. It may be that this is one of those pieces that ought to be saved for after crossover.
So I'm not expecting a labor bill. So I would suggest we still probably consider pieces of this and passing it and getting a piece over so we can keep a labor bills going. I would propose that if you wanted to introduce it and get it out there, I would propose considering taking out the corrections piece for the moment, because that heavily involves workforce too,
Mhm.
and education. And I know we have a workforce bill coming so that we could work on it after crossover. But if we did even if we did the minimum wage for agricultural workers and the workers' comp pieces, at least to get the bill out and take out the corrections pieces and keep the prevailing wage for the moment, we could introduce that if people felt comfortable with that, and then we could discuss it further, those pieces further. What is the committee's pleasure?
I'm fine with that. And I am hoping I can ask Sophie if the committee doesn't mind to take those pieces, and I want to somehow get them out with a bill number, just because there are things that people in some cases had requested who would now feel like they missed the opportunity to have it out. So as long as people are okay with seeing that under my name or somebody's name, so that the language gets out there, because I would feel bad if I was the bottleneck for
Right.
those ideas.
So can I just ask for clarification? So it sounds as if I would take the current draft 652, I would leave in extending minimum wage to agricultural workers, leave in the workers' compensation changes, leave in the state construction projects piece, remove the other pieces, and then Keisha, I would move that forward with your name on for introduction.
Something like that. Yeah, I mean, my name and others, or others' name. Yeah.
This would include things like the unemployment insurance for contingent faculty. Would it include?
No, I think it wouldn't at this point. I think that if we're not going to look at UI for school, for support staff, I think it would be inconsistent to move ahead on UVM UI at this moment. But we can certainly do that and look at it after crossover. But I think what we were looking at was minimum wage, all the workers' comp pieces, and the prevailing wage piece. Sections 11, sections, sorry, Ellen is here. Okay, great. We're going to shift in a sec. We're just going to get this taken care of. Let's start at the beginning, Sophie. Sections 1 without section E. Section vacation pay include section 3, section 4, section 5.
You said section 1 and then you went to 3. What about section 2?
That's overtime, and we agreed to not include that.
Not going to include. All right. So you're taking out section 2 of the overtime.
This is just for Bill for us to introduce it, get it on it, and move ahead on
I
it.
hope to add it back in is your goal.
Right.
Section 3, what are you doing with that? Proposed to do with that?
So just bear with me for a second and help me, committee, on this. Section 3 I would keep in for discussion. Section 4, section 5, sections 6, And section 7, and then not include section 8, which is the UI for contingent faculty. Section 9, which is DOC. Section 10, although I have a question on section 10.
Can you go back to the DOC?
Yeah,
Is that the prison labor one?
yes, that's the
Okay.
minimum wage for incarcerated individuals.
Okay, when you
It's on-
said DOC, I just worried. I mean,
Sorry, DOC, Department of Corrections.
I think I just want to say with that one, in my mind, there might even be value in looking at that to help with the crisis of corrections workers in general. But yeah,
don't
I mean,
disagree. I think that this needs much discussion, and I think it fits very well, actually, in our workforce bill. That will begin, and we could discuss this further because it involves, where do we spend the money? Because it's $8 to $12 million is what JFO thought this might cost,
mhm.
and is that money wisely spent paying people doing job or actually beefing up the CTE program and the training programs instead? So to me, that's a good discussion for us. David, do you want to weigh in on that?
Sure. Yeah, I agree with what you just said, Allison. I think the money should be dedicated more to training and preparation for introductions with community and not during the incarceration.
We're having a hard time hearing you, David. It sounds like your internet connection is challenged.
Yes, challenged. Challenged. No, I agree with what you said.
Yeah, well,
Should be done.
Sophie, I think one question I had on section 10, which is I'm not actually sure what that does.
That relates to the previous section to make sure that it updates, that all their policies are updated to
Okay.
comply with the changes above.
Okay, so we would not include 10, we would include section 11. And I think that if we had those sections in for introduction, get it out there, and then Keisha and I could I'm happy to join you, Keisha, in introducing the other pieces.
Great. That sounds fine to me.
Does that sound, Sophie, do you have that? And
So
then
I'm gonna redraft this with the ones that you're going to keep in, and then both you and Senator Ram Hinsdale will be sponsors on that, and it can move forward for introduction.
on the pieces that we are not including, the sections 2.
Now, the issue of requirements of certain payments in state construction projects, you're proposing to leave that in?
Yes, because we're getting a lot of testimony. We're getting quite a bit of testimony about that on Thursday.
Testimony from people who are advocates?
People who are concerned. Matt Musgrave, Bill Driscoll, and a couple others.
Okay, so there's some who are on either side of the issue who are scheduled to testify?
Right. Yes, because we heard some
Yeah,
very
we
strong
heard
support.
from folks who were in favor.
Yeah, we heard very strong support from Alex Potvin and others who have weighed in. But so let me just clarify, it's sections, in keeping section 1 except for section E, sections 3, sections 4 and 5, sections, this is again just to get it introduced, section 6, section 7, but not section 8, and not sections 9 or 10, and keeping in section 11. Is that the committee okay with that? And then we could vote that out if you wanted today, then we can move on to Cam and Ellen, who've been very patient. And then that gets.
I'm not prepared to vote this out today. I think it needs more study, more work, and I want a better understanding of this, the implications of some of the sections that we've talked about. So not prepared to vote this out today, at least favorably.
Okay, so I think what we were trying to do was appease your concern about not having a pill number. But if you don't want to vote it out, Randy, we can do another draft with those pieces in it and continue the discussion on those sections.
Let's do that for now. We can always
Okay.
vote it out sometime during the week if we're prepared to and we know more about it. But right now, I'm not prepared to go forward.
I think that's fine, and I think we're clear on that. Is everybody okay with that? So next draft will include the sections we just talked about. And Keisha and I will introduce the orphan sections.
Okay. I'm confused. So
Yeah.
is the committee moving forward with the sections you just listed? And then the sections that are coming out are going to be in a separate bill?
So I apologize. I had thought that to appease Randy in terms of getting a bill number, we would just vote the sections out that we at least want to continue to discuss. But we excluded the more challenging sections that we were not going to probably move forward on before crossover, which was the overtime, the UI for the faculty, the Department of Corrections stuff.
Okay,
So-
but the ones that are left, that's what I'm putting together into a bill
For
that will
K,
have you
But-
and Senator Rahm Hinsdale sponsoring that will then get introduced.
Right.
Well, I think given, the kind of where we've gone around in the discussion, since it doesn't sound like we're voting on anything today, maybe we don't have to ask Sophie to do that, surgery on the bill. And we'll just keep working on the bill as is, because then we're not getting people worried about which bill they just landed in prematurely.
sorry, I was hoping we were moving this forward to get a bill number. And that's what I think Keisha, what Keisha and I were hoping, Randy, for you, because your concern was it didn't have a bill number, and once it got introduced.
No, I understand what you're trying to do. I think though that since this hasn't had a bill number for as long as it's been around and we've been discussing for it to not have a bill number for a couple more days, I don't think the world will end and it will stay.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Great. Then let's move and let's shift gears. Sophie, thank you very much. We will continue to discuss these. And I still need comments from you, Randy, on the other two labor bills, and Keisha. I think that this was very helpful. Thank you. I think we have a clearer notion of the areas we need to further discuss and the areas we're feeling modestly comfortable with.
So to be clear, I'm not making any changes to 652 right now.
Not at the moment.
Okay.
We seem to not be, but I would, but yes. Yeah, I think sadly I was trying to help make something happen that I guess we weren't ready to do. So let us shift gears. Do we need a break? Are people needing a break, or are people okay? Cam has been patient. Ellen has been patient.
I don't need a break.
Okay, Randy and David, you okay if we keep going? Great. Cam and Ellen, welcome. Thank you both for. Let us. Sophie, thank you very much. Break? Are people needing a break, or are people okay? I think people are fine. Cam has been patient. Ellen has been patient. Sorry, what? Randy, David, you okay if we keep going? That's your voice. Oh my God, that's my voice. It's like that already, I just said that like 2 seconds ago.
It was your witness had their mic on.
Oh, okay. Sophie, thank you very much. Okay. We have a new draft, I think. Oh my God, that's my voice. It's like that already, I just said that like 2 seconds ago.
It was your witness had their mic on.
Tom Kennedy, you seem to have some mic on or something that's making it a little challenging, and then I get repeated somehow. So
Whoever is hosting can mute other people.
I just did twice.
Megan just did. Thanks. So thank you, everybody. We have a new draft, 2.2. Can you tell us, this includes the brownfield, the new brownfields language, correct?
So
Tell us what it includes.
Yes.
Welcome.
yes, for the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel, you do have a draft 2.2, which has some very,
And can our committee members see it as well?
it's
It's under today, under your name.
Yeah.
perfect and.
On the agenda. You got it? Okay, great.
And I'm trying to join. That's okay. And I will share my screen. And there were some just very minor adjustments from what we walked through last week ago this past Friday.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Okay. Ooh. It's still an echo.
No, that was me that time.
Oh, that was you. Okay.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen and then we will run through these changes very quickly. Okay. For some reason, that was not going to work. Quite sure.
Can I just ask as I scan, does this have, Cameron, some of the stuff you and I have worked on yet?
No, ma'am, not yet.
When is that? Okay.
I'm hoping to have some stuff to be able to throw in this week. I don't want to overpromise and say first thing tomorrow morning, but you and I can touch base tomorrow and get you an update on exactly where we're at.
Okay, I mean, I'll just say I really want some of those pieces to be able to vote this bill out.
Yes, ma'am. I am having an issue with,
And we'll identify them, Keisha, as we go through to make sure, because I want to make sure we know which ones they are.
Well, they're invisible in the draft. I mean, I don't know how we do
Oh,
that.
they're not the fair housing piece, because the fair housing is in and stuff.
Well, nothing's in that wasn't in last time we looked at the bill, is what I understand Cameron just said.
Oh, I thought there were some, well, he's about to share with us what the additions are.
yes, I have not added the additional pieces that Senator Ron Hinsdale has requested in regards to housing pieces. So we've mentioned it briefly in the committee. Homeowners associations and, prohibiting common interest communities from being able to exclude individuals from leasing or excuse me, from renting was one of them. And so there's a few pieces that I
Yeah,
have not
okay.
added yet.
Great.
Okay, sorry about all of the technical issues and difficulties there. Okay.
Great.
Draft 2.2, excuse me, dated March 6th. And so what I've done is I've highlighted the sections in yellow that have been added. So very minor changes from the conversation we had Friday before town meeting where we walked through the bill. I'm going to move to them very quickly and I will point out what page number as soon as we get there.
And I guess my question for you on this, on the okay, so you're not, okay. Why do we not have the money asks? Because we need the money asks.
Because
they're not in the appropriations piece either.
correct. So I did not include them. I can include what the administration has asked for.
Yeah, that's what we need
Okay,
in here,
perfect.
because it needs to be a complaint with all the asks.
We can throw that in there.
Okay.
That will be easy.
Governor, identifying the differences between what's in the governor's budget and what is.
Okay.
But I believe this piece is 6 million of the, but
I think VHIP, I think the proposal, and unfortunately the commissioner just stepped out of the room, but I believe it was 4 million, and for the manufactured home improvement program was an additional 2, so that would be a total of 6. Yes, ma'am. Okay,
Right.
so quickly, so page 15, this is under the Housing and Residential Services Planning Committee. So.
So what page?
This is, the committee itself starts on page 13. If you all recall, this was a committee that's being created here on
Right.
page 13.
For the
to-
developmental leadership.
Yep, to
So-
develop that state plan. So what I've done is on page 15, I've added that the committee will have the assistance of the Office of Legislative Operations and the Office of Legislative Counsel.
Perfect.
For their.
We need to ask Susan, I am not clear why the treasurer is included on this, in this committee report. I mean, in this task force.
So that is the first change, and then I believe that on page 18, this was just a typo, but I highlighted it anyway. This was this is in the pilot program that the state treasurer will do to
On the
report individuals' rent.
Yep.
people's credit score can be improved by, can be affected by their timely payments of their rent.
Yes, ma'am. So the one edit that I've made to the draft that we have is just to fix that date. It had it being reported at 2027. I moved it out to 2028. I will comment, simply a global comment, that the state treasurer's office got back to me during your town meeting break with some amendments that they would like to see to this section. The kind of structural changes, and I can add that to your next draft if you would like.
I would suggest you add them, given that they're responsible for this and we have them coming in tomorrow, I believe.
That will be a,
That, I believe
I believe
Mike
that
is
you
coming
do.
in at 11:15.
So I'll make those changes, and then we can walk through that. The next version, I'm happy to talk about it if the committee would like as well here, once I get through these changes. So the next change, I believe, is an appropriation of $100,000 to the state
Right,
treasurer
which
to do that work, which I did not include in the previous draft. Those are the only changes to what you walked through the Friday before town meeting.
Okay. Right, let us, what we didn't, and so what we're gonna do today is talk about the manufactured homes by right with Ellen, and then we're gonna pivot to brownfields with Tom. Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, Brandon,
As we're looking at this, this particular draft, the 2.2 draft, there's several comments regarding housing and public accommodation protections that go to and include the issue of immigration status. And given what's going on in Washington regarding that, I'm wondering, is there, what are the implications of our including this in these particular sections, if any? And I guess I'm asking for a legal opinion there.
so we're looking at sections,
We're going.
Section 9 in particular about what constitutes.
yeah, sections 8, it's sections 8 and 9, right?
It starts on page 19 and starts with section 7.
Okay, hold on,
And
gotcha. Page 19.
Mhm.
And now, and the new section 7, right?
And so what we're doing in these next few sections is you're amending Vermont's Public Accommodations and Fair Housing Act. And you're essentially, throughout all of these amendments that are the same, we're adding the word citizenship and immigration status into the current list of protected classes for protections in public accommodations and unfair housing practices. And to
what-
the question directly, what I would say is, and Senator Brock may just need to flesh that out a little bit further. These are state level protections. And so they can and are separate and apart from any federal protection that exists in public accommodations and fair housing as well. So we have added, as the state of Vermont, we've added additional protected classes in our public accommodations and unfair housing practices that don't exist at the federal level.
And what I'm really asking is, what is the exposure that the state has as a result of doing this based on both federal law and current federal practice. Basically, I think we should know what exposures we may subject ourselves to, particularly by adding this and then enforcing it. If, for example, and I can think of all kinds of examples, if the federal government says that it is unlawful to rent a residence to a person who is in the United States illegally.
Right. Well, so if that were to happen, you know, we would get into an analysis of, you know, whether or not said federal law would somehow preempt the state law in this instance. I can say one thing that we have done in this section is we did add a subsection here at the end of the unfair housing practices piece. This is on page 24.
That's section 8.
This would be the end of section 9. On page 24, which we did include language that says if it's required by federal law, the verification of immigration status shall not constitute a violation of this section. So someone wouldn't be violating state law in this instance if federal law did require them to validate immigration status. So I think that would somewhat alleviate the situation that you're bringing up, Senator Brock, in the event that federal law was passed and, you know, kind of mandated it in a similar vein to employment law, for example. So we do have that piece. I probably want to think about just a little bit further, maybe come back, or Senator Brock, we can chat separate just to make sure I'm able to fully answer the concern that you have.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm really looking for is a careful analysis of what the implications might be of this addition and whether we're prepared to live with those.
Yeah, and if section D protects us enough.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, and I don't think this is what you're saying, Senator Brock, but I think then the question becomes the entire Fair Housing Act in some ways. You know, this federal government could go on the attack on people because of their gender identity or sexual orientation or, you know, national origin.
There are no situations now of which that I'm aware of under federal law in which there is an issue with anything other than immigration status.
Oh,
So right. So this is what this would do is, you know, this would be protection that we're adding into state law.
right.
And so, you know, I'm not aware off the top of my head, which is why I want to do some additional thought and analysis and come back. But, you know, for the federal government to, let's say, sue the state, you know, I'm not aware of any provision that the federal government would be able to stand on to say that you state can't provide additional state level protections for these circumstances.
Well, they could, but then the issue becomes one of many of our housing programs do use in some way, shape, or form federal funds, don't they?
Exactly. Yes, sir. And that's where I was going to go, which is, you know, I could see to flesh out the hypothetical here, if a situation were that federal law said that if you're going to use federal funds or, you know, some sort of attachment of federal funds on the condition that, you know, the funds be used, or if the funds are used, then the entity has to validate citizenship status if they're going to use the funds for some sort of, you know, housing development or affordable rent, et cetera. You know, the funds that go through HUD and come to us as a state that are used for housing assistance. If there was some sort of requirement added on that those dollars, if they're spent, you'd have to validate an individual's citizenship status in that situation. And I do think in that event, if that were to occur, that's why you have the sub D here. And I believe the sub D is going to protect the entity or the individuals who are receiving those dollars in that event from violating state law, because, you know, it's specifically being carved out. So those people, you know, wouldn't be violating state law in that instance if they're following some sort of federal requirement to validate in that instance.
And Randy, in terms of red flags for the feds to jump down Vermont's throat, we already have stuff that they already hate in here. in the protected classes. So it's,
Well, but we don't have anything in here that I'm aware of that actually constitutes a violation of federal law. And so one question that I also have is there any requirement, for example, in any of the HUD or other kinds of contracts or sources of funds that come to the state right now, that right now, based on what's in law regarding immigration, that may pose an issue for us?
I think it's a good question. And right now, you know, who knows?
I think before we pass a law, we ought to at least know what we're getting into.
Well,
we make that decision.
it's a good concern, Randy, but you and I both know that it's so quixotic, and we have not yet had any HUD changes that have alerted us that this would be a problem yet. But you know, who knows what tomorrow brings? And the challenge is, I think, at a certain point, we have to do what we value and not what the feds are, or in their fairly quixotic fashion, may or may not do tomorrow.
Well, it's what they may or may not do tomorrow. I'm interested in right now. That's
Right.
But I'm interested in knowing, what do the rules say today? Do we know?
I believe we can check that, but I'm pretty certain that everything here on this page, until we add this, is okay. So
I would also just say, you know, let's say this was, you know, anyone providing accommodations to someone who they knowingly housed, who didn't have citizenship status in the state. Let's just take that scary thought and see it to its conclusion. The state would be absorbing the liability to give people plausible deniability around that. So individual farmers and individual landlords and others wouldn't be facing this question alone.
right. So Cam is going to research this further, I think.
So what I have is, yes, Senator Brock was asking specifically what, if any, and are there any, you know, requirements currently existing regarding federal funding attachments for housing associated with, you know, immigration status, validation, et cetera. Senator Brock, that's kind of the note that I took. I want to make sure I'm gathering what you're looking for.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Got it.
okay.
Good question. Okay.
Senator Brock, did you have any other questions before we?
Shift to Ellen.
I don't. I mean, obviously, I'm also thinking about the future and what may be likely, but you can't obviously investigate every potential contingency.
Well, it's
I don't understand that.
it's a day by day thing here. So I think we just need to do our best, and yeah, yes. So if people are okay, let's shift. Cam, if you could stay where you are with, and Ellen, could we shift to the sections you drafted on the by right? I believe it's section. What section are we? Section
11, but
11, which is page.
so did you guys talk about the LURBS appeal study at all? I haven't been here.
We have talked about it briefly, trying to get it sooner so that we can be prepared to act on appeals immediately in January.
Okay.
Ellen, do you
Ellen?
want to take over screen, or do you want me to keep sharing for you?
I mean, if you're already there and you don't mind, I think this would be pretty quick.
So, Ellen, you want to start there on page 24 and then go to by right?
Sure. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I haven't been in this committee at this session, so I don't want to say hi. I handled the land use, energy, and climate change issues for the office. So I handle municipal zoning and Act 250. So Section 10, which your committee has already discussed, is from last year's bill. There's an appeal study that the new board is working on. And so this draft moves up the date to November 15th of this year for them to submit the report. It also asks them specifically to outline what resources, including funding and staff, they would need if they were to take on appeals.
Right. Are people okay with that? David, Randy, Keisha?
I'm not sure I entirely understand it.
Sure. So in last year's big land use bill, you directed the new land use review board, which took over for the natural resources
Mhm.
board. There's a number of issues related to appeals, including appeals of housing permits that you've asked the board to look at if they could streamline appeals or if they would recommend a different process for Act 250 appeals. And they are working on that report. The board just sat, in January, so I don't know how far along they are, but this is asking for the due date to be moved up so that a bill could be drafted based on what their recommendations are.
Exactly. It's just totally selfish so that we can really get the appeals discussion going robustly in January.
I'm just reading the first paragraph, 6604C, and it may be the language, and maybe I'm just getting numb, but notwithstanding any other requirement of this chapter, to the contrary, development soils may be managed at a location permitted pursuant to an insignificant waste event approval authorization issued pursuant to the solid waste management rules that contains as a minimum the following.
So, Senator Brock, I'm on page 24 in section 10.
Okay. We're on the appeals.
Yeah, I moved forward to 12, so excuse me for reading ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, and so that's related to brownfield redevelopment, and I did not draft those sections, so I can't answer questions on that.
Okay, thank you.
That's okay. I see why you'd be confused.
Okay, so let's stick with section 10 for the moment. I think we're mostly okay with this.
Okay.
Well, Madam Chair,
Okay.
I guess I just want to reserve the right to, in my mind, recognize that we asked the LRB to study, what appeals they might take on and how that might square with environmental court. But I didn't waive away my right to look at overall what falls under appeals. I don't think that's solely a question of the LRB. I think that's a discussion for this year that I hope to have in a number of bills moving forward in a housing crisis. So I'm not prepared to say that this replaces all conversations about appeals until next January.
No, I think that's good. And I think we're going to be getting I know that there in the housing bill coming from the House, there are some appeal proposals for us, so that that's very much something we'll be discussing after crossover.
Yeah, and this exact language in section 10 is in the House's bill.
Right.
They haven't voted it out yet, but the language here is identical to what the House General Committee has in their bill as well.
So if we're okay, we'll move to section 11, which is on page 26. And Keisha, this is one of your key provisions that you had asked for. Do you have any sort of thoughts before Ellen just walks us through it?
This is manufactured housing by right.
Yes, exactly.
I think Senator Brock has raised this before. Manufactured housing has a lot of stigma around it, and yet nearly 10% of Vermonters prefer this type of housing. It's one of the most affordable forms of homeownership someone can have, and we are talking about other ways to ramp up the production of manufactured housing. And frankly, Vermont, like many states, has a history of discriminating against small lot sizes and manufactured housing as a type of dwelling. And this is one attempt to try and essentially, as you would with any civil rights language, remove discrimination against a type of housing that people associate with, lower income people, and have that conversation very openly, because we haven't.
And I would note also, Keisha, that in addition to that remark, I would add that manufactured housing is now taking on, as we have discussed in this committee quite a bit, a whole new aspect. It's not just mobile homes, it's manufactured off-site housing that is then constructed, and that is technically a manufactured house. So this also is protecting against that too, I assume.
Well, yes, and I feel like we tie ourselves into knots to not talk about mobile homes and trailer parks, and that those are fine. I mean, that's the thing. I think we need to have a very open policy discussion in government about how silence or silent neglect in this area of the law has made our most affordable form of home ownership, with people who want to have their own four walls and a little piece of land, and a community that's very close. We wanted to call that tiny houses or, whatever else, but we should just acknowledge that there is nothing wrong with this type of housing, regardless of what technological changes might occur or how it might look as quote unquote nice as stick-built housing. People have a right to live and own something, regardless of what somebody else thinks it looks like.
Right, or how small the lot is. So, Ellen, would you be kind enough to just walk us through section 11? Thank you, Keisha, for that intro.
Sure. So this is an amendment to Title 24, Section 4412. Your committee worked a lot on this section last year. So this is the required provisions for municipal zoning. So this would apply in any town that has adopted zoning provisions. And it's adding some additional language to a statute that already exists. So currently the statute has this provision starting down on line 12 that says that except for subdivision 4414 1E and F, which are the flood hazard bylaws that are required, no bylaw shall have the effect of excluding mobile homes, modular housing, or prefabricated housing from any district that allows year-round residential development in the municipality, except upon the same terms and conditions as conventional housing is excluded. So the statute currently says that the bylaws of a municipality cannot exclude these types of housing from the municipality entirely. And so that how that has been interpreted is that towns can have sort of the option to designate just specific areas where manufactured housing is allowed. And so I think this language would clarify that they're allowed in any district that allows housing. And so currently it's the statute goes on to provide that the town cannot prohibit entirely from the municipality the construction of mobile home parks or having any district that has manufactured housing. But this is intended to clarify that it can be allowed anywhere where there is residential development allowed. That's it.
Great. Okay. And that is what that does. Any thoughts or concerns?
Have we had any feedback on this particular section from municipalities at this point?
No, I have not. We can absolutely have VLCT weigh in. Okay, great. Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. That is pretty straightforward. Maybe the most straightforward thing we've discussed today. I wasn't saying it. It's so weird that everybody here be able to read everybody's faces.
Well, I mean, I'll just say, when you advance a civil right, it's extremely straightforward.
Yeah.
You either agree or not that it's time to end discriminatory practices.
Thank you. Exactly. I know. And the silence is often deafening, but not. I think I'm taking it as full support here.
Well, report is to ensure that the public has a chance to look at this and weigh in, which hasn't happened yet.
The public has had an no, I would not agree with that, Randy. The public, this has been up on our website for over a week. So I do not agree with that. We have not specifically asked towns through VLCT to weigh in, but we will.
Good.
Great.
I mean, this is not, the first thing that people read when they get up in the morning. So in
Or
terms of
maybe they want
widespread
me to
knowledge
say-
of this section, I don't agree that there's been widespread knowledge of what's here. Now,
Right.
and many people may very well agree with it, and it may well pass, but I haven't heard enough yet. I
Right,
haven't heard enough commentary one way or the other.
got
I
it.
would just, I mean, I know, obviously I'm on my soapbox here, but I personally, we've looked at this with shelters and other things, and we haven't always seen eye to eye with every municipality.
Mhm.
But by and large, unless we take this on at a state level, I do believe this is something that contributes to mobile home parks being in places that are increasingly unsafe, like floodplains. So we know that they are pushed into places that are undesirable to most others, which is usually somewhere that is unsafe for their health.
Right, agreed. Good. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ellen. I think, David, do you have anything you want to add here? I'm sorry, because I'm not, I'm assuming you're going to jump in. I hope you're not texting me because I'm not looking at my texts. I suppose I should be. Oh my God, I got 23 texts. So, but I don't see,
Sure, but your friend's comments that, it's, that's well. It's to weigh in. And, I'm not sure that is,
David, I hate to suggest this, but if you turned your camera off, we might be able to hear you better. Because I couldn't understand a word of what you just said. Did anybody else? David, can you go again and see if that makes a difference? Or you could text me, because now I know to look at your text.
stuff. But you can,
Can anybody else hear her?
No.
And also put it in the chat.
David, if you put it in the chat, Megan can share it with us, or everybody on Zoom can see it, but she can share it with me.
Only I can see it, but I can,
Only she can see it,
but I can read it.
but she can read it if you put your thoughts in the chat. But until we see those, I'm going to shift, if we could, to brownfields, because I think we're pretty clear on this. Is that okay? Great. Ellen, see you around like a donut. Great to see you. Great to have you back in this committee. Thank you. Okay, Thomas Kennedy, good to see you not at town meeting. Glad
Hello.
you're elected.
For the record, my name is Thomas Kennedy. I am Director of Community Development at Mount Scottney Regional Commission. And I send greetings from Washington, D.C.
Oh, cool.
Economic Development Policy Conference right now. So we're learning all about what's going on in D.C. or not knowing what's going on. So
Thank you. Well, and if you hear anything about HUD, let us know.
we will. What I can say is that what we're hearing from the administration is depending on the agency, they have between 30 and 90 days to review all their programs. So things may be placed on a pause. Good news is what we've heard is if you have an existing grant agreement, the likelihood of that those funds being removed is highly unlikely. But if you do not have a grant agreement at this time, then it is unclear what will happen with those funds. So.
Thank you.
Okay, so related.
Well, that's encouraging. Although we have agreements, well, that's another subject. Okay, you have been working with Cam and with ANR and Mike O'Grady on language and what section, Cam, are we? We're in section 12. So we're in sections 12, 13, and 14, is that right?
Yes,
And 15. Yes? Is that right, Cam?
You were section
And 16.
in 16.
12, 13,
14.
14, 15, 16.
And then we're saving 17 for Chip,
Yes, ma'am.
which, Tom, we missed you this morning in Springfield, but we talked about Chip as Chip.
Okay.
The hit as Chip. So, Tom, or Cam, do you want to, how do we want to go through this? Tom, has Tom done most amount of work with Mike and able to
Yeah, I
go
would,
through it?
I would not be able to walk through this or
Okay.
wouldn't feel comfortable. I would defer to O'Grady on.
Yeah, and we have not been able to get Mike O'Grady, frustratingly.
So,
Oh, great.
If I- if you-
David's gonna weigh in tomorrow, and the mobile home by right needs more visibility as committee can, yeah. Agreed, David, thanks. Tom,
so,
Take-
just, and I don't want to play junior attorney here, but, to try to address Senator Brock's issue under section 12, line 20, I think that if you put,
sorry, there isn't a line 20 on our,
okay, I don't have 2.2, I have 2.1. So under the management of development soils, it says, notwithstanding any other requirements of this chapter, to the contrary, development soils may be managed. And what I'm going to suggest you say is at a permitted location pursuant to the solid waste management rules that contain at a minimum the following. So I'm suggesting is you strike permitted pursuant to insignificant waste event approval authorization issued pursuant.
line 20. So would you be, Cam, do you have that?
You're proposing to strike the words after permitted, so pursuant to.
So are you, sorry, I just want to be clear on what page you're on in draft 2.1.
It's here, it's on page 27.
Yeah, line 20, okay.
No, I would say, Mr. Kennedy, confirm you're looking at lines 7 and 8 on the screen correctly, correct?
Well, you're challenging my eyesight here, but let's see. There you go.
So you mean sec number 2?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct, Mr. Wood.
Looking at this subsection A, so the beginning of section 12.
Section 12, subsection A, okay. Line 7 and 8 in draft 2.2?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. And so you would change that, Tom?
I would strike on line 7, to an insignificant waste event approval authorization issued pursuant. I would strike all that because there's a whole set of existing rules for the development of management of development soils.
Okay,
So,
you would just go pursuant to the solid waste management?
yes, exactly.
Okay,
Okay.
so it exists already?
Yeah.
So we don't need it, okay.
And then,
I mean, I just want to say, I just don't know if I'm on board with that. I don't know if
fine.
that's a
It's just trying to
technical
make it
change.
simpler to read.
So you're saying it's technical?
I'm saying it's redundant. What
It's
they're trying to-
duplicative, it already exists, he said.
Yeah. But I'm not gonna, Mr. O'Grady had a reason why he has in there. It just can read better is what I'm trying to say. It's a struggle to try to understand what that statement says. So just as throwing out as some advice, there
Got it.
are specific rules in managing, in the management of development soils.
Okay,
All right?
yeah,
if we could go down to paragraph 5.
On page 28.
No, sorry, go,
Oh, great. Welcome, Tom. Tom, the other Tom Chittenden is on the phone. Great. Good to have you.
Thanks. Sorry I'm late.
No, that's okay. We understood. We are in housing and we're talking about brownfield cleanup.
sorry, this is a minor thing, because the versions are quite
section are you
different, so
in,
it gets a
Tom?
little confusing. Outside of that, I don't have any questions or comments on the rest of the language for the brownfields. I think
Okay.
it's
for-
fine.
So we will wait and chat about this further with O'Grady, who drafted this.
Yeah.
This does include A&R making it a top, putting it a top housing brownfield cleanup top of the list for priority.
Right.
But would you like to talk to us about the funding? Because you're a big advocate for the funding increase. And I know I have committee members who are concerned about asking more than what the governor has asked for in this. And I think that we need to be comfortable with this ask and how it's divided up.
So I fully understand the appropriation challenges. I just feel that what it's in the governor's recommend is just not going to be near enough to try to develop housing in those areas where we're trying to direct the housing, which is in our areas, our village centers, and in our downtowns. I mean, most of those areas are not going to be green fields, and we're going to run into brownfield issues. As I testified in front of the committee a couple of weeks ago, I came up with very, very quickly with over $48 million in brownfield cleanup needs.
Yeah.
And so the request is to provide additional funding to the Agency of Commerce's existing program. The governor has $2 million in that, and we're suggesting that there be more. And then there has been an ongoing program for the last 2 fiscal years or 3 fiscal years, funding through the Agency of Commerce for the regional planning commissions to have an assessment program to again assess these sites in our downtowns and the like. Right now, we are almost out of money. We have less than $500,000 of we have been over the years provided with up to $3 million. So we just have a little bit of money left. And so that's why I'm suggesting that there be appropriated another $2 million. Now, whether the appropriation is for a single year or over a 2-year period, I can certainly leave that out. But we fully understand the challenges, the budgetary challenges. But if we really want to try to get housing in the areas where Act 181 wants us to, we have to address brownfields, or we're just not going to get anywhere. And the other thing I want to make clear is we run into brownfields also with putting in infrastructure. So if you're putting in sewer and water lines, you run into brownfields. And so it's just ubiquitous when we're trying to work in our downtowns.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Keisha.
Anything I feel like I put my foot down even on things that I really care about. But I'd want to make sure that there are no appeals allowed for projects that receive these funds, and or that they meet a certain density requirement. I imagine many of them have, but if we're talking about continuing to fund this and make it more permanent, I want to make sure that state money is going to the most number of units for the most affordable amount. So I just don't see that in here, and I'd like to see that in here before we pass it.
So you are addressing that in the DEC section of this bill, where you're saying the priority has to be for housing. Right now, the program under the jurisdiction of the Agency of Commerce, the priorities are for economic development projects and for housing. So you could add, if you so desire, some more directive language in the ACCD program.
And that is,
This and Madam Chair, this goes back to my density algorithm that I'd like to work on with ACCD that to me is our jurisdiction. It's just as much our jurisdiction, if not more, than natural resources, just like we would say it's transportation's jurisdiction as well, how many units are created. But I'm really struggling with just spending money on things where we're not doing our utmost to ensure that the state is getting the maximum number of units to create affordability at 150% AMI, for example. So that is not telling necessarily a housing developer what to do. It's telling other stakeholders they can't reduce the density of a project that is receiving state funds, and they can't appeal to the point that the resources are then spent on appeals and permits rather than housing.
it strikes me that would not be difficult to include, Cam. Can you and Mike work on language that would include that?
I will mention it to O'Grady. I don't want to presume whether what's currently in statute.
We asked him to be, we need him.
Well, I think Ellen is working on this for me. I think it should be in a housing bill, not necessarily a natural resources bill. I'm trying to work with whoever is putting anything anywhere, but I think it's a housing issue. Housing density is our issue, not, the main jurisdiction.
Housing density is definitely our issue. But the brownfield, given that most of these brownfields are in village centers, downtowns and village centers, and enabling housing that would then be subject to density requirements, I think it would be great to add that as a, dotting our I's and crossing our T's. I mean, it doesn't hurt to add it, I don't think. I mean, it makes sense to add it. Just the question is where. Just trying to find the language.
Well, I mean, this is where I don't want to work backwards into putting it in every little place versus looking at the language that's really important to me about ensuring density along water and sewer and density for projects that receive state funds and limit the appeals. So I can't have this conversation about spending more money without having those conversations about ensuring we're not throwing money away.
Well, no money on cleaning up brownfields is throwing money away. I'm sorry, I just don't see it. But I think that adding language to ensure it is, we're really asking the brownfields program in A&R to prioritize housing, and that is where absolutely we could add this language. I think that would be good. And if Cam could communicate that with Mike, I don't know why. I think all the words, maybe it's just because I have had so little sleep, but it is all the words. I cannot find the A&R prioritizing language. Where is that? That should be front and center, and we should add it right there. I think, or somewhere close by.
It's in section 14.
It's in, thank you. Somebody just
I'm looking.
Correct me. I think it's section 13, which
13 maybe.
In draft 2.2.
When conducting any review required by the secretary shall prioritize the review of remediation at a site that contains housing.
Oh.
And I think, does that make sense that would be a natural place to include, Keisha, this additional language? Where would you suggest?
Swimming outside of my lane. I think it potentially, depending on what you want the scope to be, if you're limiting the funding that we're providing in this bill. So the $6 million that we have a few sections down. So we're giving $6 million for the purpose of, brownfields revitalization. And as I was listening to Senator Ron Hinsdale, I was getting the impression she was saying, if those dollars are being used, then they should be going to, a project that, has some sort of density requirement, et cetera. So it would probably more appropriately go here.
In section 16.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
You would kind of attach this funding to projects that would, have some sort of density capacity.
And it would
to
be
that.
in a village, yeah.
Again, kind of swimming outside my lane there. That's something I would probably chit chat with Ellen and O'Grady about. Sounds like Ellen might already be working on something more globally. And so it could be possible to grab what she is working on and insert it here associated with these dollars in particular.
Okay. And then if we could loop in Tom, that would be great. Tom Kennedy.
If I could make two suggestions, one would be earlier when Ellen testified, you were talking about permitted rights for manufactured housing and like. I think if you ask people from the league and folks, some other regional planning commission folks, there is language right now that requires certain densities already, but they could discuss that with you, and then you could sort of loop that into the brownfield discussion. The other thing is, and this is more of a cautionary tale, is we also want to continue to create jobs in Vermont, and we need to have some of this brownfields monies for economic development, for businesses that want to move into either vacant sites or whatever. So I just want to caution you that we may be doing ourselves a disservice if this money is solely for housing, the brownfield money.
I don't think we can make it solely for housing.
Okay, right, but okay.
But I think
Is it for mixed use as well?
Yes.
Okay. Absolutely for mixed, yeah. But I think
Good.
that brownfield is generally, major economic development enabler, both for housing and economic development.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking for the tools that go to these projects to not just talk about density, but to talk about the ultimate outcome that either density or increased funding can provide, that it meets a certain area median income target. I don't want people to think I just want more units of housing, but the theory is that more units of housing make a project pencil out in a way that they can keep the cost affordable for middle income and working class folks. So I think, Alex stepped out, I think, right? He's the commissioner.
Alex stepped out.
So I'm just looking for ways where we provide state funding or state tools and resources for the density algorithm to help illustrate for municipalities what happens when they try to reduce the density of a project. That someone either has to put in more money or it ultimately doesn't pencil out at a certain area median income.
Right. So can we bring the great minds of O'Grady, Tchaikovsky, and Wood together on this? Because I think you're clear on the ask, but I don't think it can be exclusively. I think it needs, can't tie it completely to housing, but certainly to the extent practicable, brownfields, we hope will enable denser housing in where we want it, as Tom said. If we want houses in areas that we want housing, we need to do more brownfield cleanup. And that's mostly in areas that are required denser rather than non-denser housing.
Well, and again, I have my urban soils concerns that I still want us to address.
Right. And that, the soils piece, O'Grady will address in the sections 12, I think in sections 12 and in sections 12. Okay. Anything else, Tom?
No, that's all I have.
Okay, great. And do you know your assessment money is down to 500,000, which won't take you very far this year. Do you have a notion of how far, and could you just remind us of the 4 million that's going to the revolving loan fund that goes out in grants and loans, correct?
That's right, and that's administered through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and there's a review committee composed of ACCD, Regional Planning Commissions, and Regional Development Corporation, and DEC. And so we review applications and we make recommendations. We have a scoring formula. Generally speaking, we only fund economic development or housing projects. And my understanding, and you can check in with Commissioner Goldstein, but I believe they have less than $500,000 in their program as well.
Right. So it basically absorbs every penny we send its way.
Yes, and those funds get highly leveraged because we do this grant loan thing, and I'm sure the agency has the numbers, but these funds are highly leveraged when we use them.
Right.
I just want to say I'm okay focusing on housing and mixed use right now. I don't think we have the workforce for other major sites without housing people at a rate they can afford. So I don't know if we're trying to make something permanent happen, but I don't need a permanent change. I just am perfectly comfortable with the money going for housing and in walkable designated centers and places like that right now. So I just think that's the more pressing need. And I want to say that for the record so that the intent is clear right now if we do add more money.
Let's work on that language. But I think, one is the other. They're kind of a catch-22. Economic development and housing are tied together and have been in most of the brownfield cleanup sites that have gone forward. So I think they go hand in glove, I think.
Well, then any site could include housing. I mean, that's it, even if we allow for some industrial park or economic use, we have to start seeing housing as close to where people work, I would say. So I don't think we can afford to leave housing out of the conversation anywhere since we have so many open jobs and so few places for people to live.
Thomas Chittenden, you have a question.
Yes, I'm driving, so I believe this is safe I just want to say I'm agreeing with everything I'm hearing being said. I just want to add one more thing where my intent and my interests are in actually lowering or addressing some of our brownfield remediation standards so as to reduce some of the costs that we're putting on these entire processes. And I know that intersects with the Agency of Natural Resources, but in testimony and conversation, I've just heard that we have standards that make handling dirt more expensive than it needs to be, especially routing it all over the state. So that's where my interests are when we're talking about intent, is I'd love to look at the regulations we have in place that are hurting our housing building because we're just making it too darn difficult to move dirt around.
Right, and that's addressed in section 12 a bit, and O'Grady's going to go through that with us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to underscore that, can we book testimony in advance for some of these things so that we can expedite them?
We haven't asked out for O'Grady. We were hoping O'Grady was. We've asked, and he has not been available. So we're asking.
No, I mean A&R, AGC, some of the folks that are working on this. Our landfill capacity is an economic issue just as much as it is a natural resources issue.
Yep, agreed. Okay. Anything else, Cam, on this draft? And so, Tom, thank you. Anything else you want to add?
No, thank you.
Good luck at your conference.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
That was good news about the grants.
We'll see what happens. I'll inform you if I learn more.
Okay, great.
Bye-bye.
And so, we have two people who've been very patient in this room all afternoon. And I'm just wondering if they would like to weigh in at any point. We're going to be talking about the TIP piece tomorrow, the now CHIP piece. But Megan Sullivan and Matt Coda have been here all afternoon. Anything that you would like to weigh in on?
We think Matt Coda Mental Health, speaking of GBIC and SPPA, interested in CHIP.
Okay, great. So that
There, yeah.
we're chatting further tomorrow.
Yeah.
And Megan?
Megan Sullivan, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Ron Chamber of Commerce, just here to take it all in after a week away. I couldn't possibly wait until Tuesday.
Happy
to come in
addiction.
person.
Okay. So, committee, should we, we're going to have Becky Wasserman is coming to talk about the rental, the credit score with your rental payments. She's coming at 3:45. So we have some time for committee discussion on the rest of the bill at the moment, if we want to go through it section by section. We are going to be discussing CHIP tomorrow with David White and Jessica Hartleman and John Gray. So we're going to be discussing that pretty fully tomorrow, I hope. So that's after we're off the floor tomorrow.
Madam Chair, you know, I have heard concerns and questions about how much CHIP will do for communities outside of Chittenden County. And I don't know that any of those three witnesses you mentioned can speak to that. And I do think we need to hear from like a mid-sized community or somebody about how this should be structured so that it works for rural Vermont.
I think that's a good point, and because I want to make sure this can work in our much smaller communities and in sort of tier 2 places. So let's figure that out. We won't have time, Megan.
An idea would be
Right.
Laura Lee Tester from the.
She testified already.
Oh, okay.
About
But
what?
that's.
She testified how helpful this would be. I mean, she testified to far more, but she testified when we had the NEK Day.
She's been I think a consistent voice for rural Vermont and the need for a program.
We
like
could have
this.
her weigh in more fully on this particular proposal. It would be great. Perfect. That would be a good one. And open to other ideas. Anybody who has a suggestion of a smaller community, certainly Laura Lee would be. And I think we have her contact. Obviously, she testified already. So, should we go through the bill and see how people are feeling about everything? Well, okay.
Would you like me to share screen again?
Sure, because we have 15 minutes to go through, and as soon as Becky, if you just let me know when Becky joins us, that would be great.
Yep.
We're hearing also from Michael Gaughan about the Infrastructure Sustainability Fund. That is coming up after VHIP. So, and the one person I think we also want to hear from on VHIP is Maria Royal. Also on, is that right? Pam, we had talked about that.
Potentially there was, so here in section 1, it was all the changes related to VHIP. There was a question, I believe it was from Senator Chittenden, about this sub B here. So this is the section that says, with regards to actions undertaken pursuant to this section, entities, including the grantees and contractors shall be exempt from licensed lender law. Again, this is, because the department is granting the monies to nonprofit entities who are then subsequently loaning that money out to landlords to actually do the work under the program. And I believe the question came up of, okay, well then what specifically are we exempting them from? And if you want detailed conversation about what's in, Vermont's licensed lender law, what are the requirements, you would potentially want to hear from Maria Royal.
Tom, are you still interested in having Maria testify? Happy to arrange it if we.
I don't have a sticking point enough to say that we have to, but I'm always happy to hear from Maria Royal if it fits the schedule, madam.
Okay, great, thanks.
And I'll let her know.
Okay, and you might just ask her, maybe she should give us an answer through you, which would be great. Any concerns with section 1? Because there's some big changes. We have made VHIP a permanent. I mean, the creation of it is the only new thing that we're creating in this is on page 5 is the revolving fund. We had put VHIP into statute as a permanent.
It is a permanent program.
Last year or the year before.
Yeah, the main change that is happening here, I would say there are two large substantive changes that are being proposed
let's
here.
chat about this.
The first is currently the money goes out in 3 ways. It's either a grant, or it is a 5-year forgivable loan, or it's a 10-year forgivable loan. And the language here would remove the 5-year forgivable loan. So it would only be grants or 10-year forgivable loans. That's the first substantive large change I would mention.
So it removes 5-year loans, only enables for 5 years grants.
So
And it removes certain eligibilities for who can.
And that's the second change, which is
So it creates those. So it's now 10 years is the forgivable loans, and they can convert, as I recall, grants into loans.
correct. Yes. And then the second large change that I would comment is.
Hold on a second. 5 years. Yeah.
If.
What
I
page?
apologize for the scrolling, everyone. I'm trying to just get to the right place I want.
Yeah, we have to
Okay.
talk it so Tom
Right.
can.
So this is page 3. Yep. So this is on page 3. So.
Verbalize it, so Tom can.
So these are the populations of individuals that landlords are required to then, rent to if the landlord receives funding under the program. So individuals who are exiting homelessness, individuals actively working with an immigrant or refugee resettlement program, individual with a disability who's receiving or to receive Medicaid. This is where, the proposal Senator Hinsdale wanted to include individuals who are displaced due to activity related to climate change. Right. So whether you're doing a grant, a 5-year loan or a 10-year loan, the landlord's required to then rent to individuals with these populations. The administration is proposing to remove that requirement for the 10-year loans. So they're not obligated to, to coordinate to rent to one of those individuals. Instead, the 10-year loans, the landlord would be required to, rent the new unit at fair market rent.
So the 10-year loans would no longer have a requirement of including people exiting homelessness.
Specifically limited or targeted to the individuals of those populations. It would just be open to anyone. The landlord would be required to rent it at fair market rent. Senator Brock had a question last time about the establishment of fair market rent and how that's done through HUD. I have not had the chance to grab some information on that, Senator Brock, yet, but I'm acknowledging your question still.
Good, thank you.
So it no longer. So this would mean So what would this would only then apply to the 5-year grants?
So the populations, the homelessness, the people exiting homelessness, refugee resettlement, climate change, those targeted populations would only apply to the grants moving forward and not the 10-year loans.
And what? And we're trying to remember Sean's testimony on this. Were more people taking as a result? Were more people? Okay, and they're thinking what? By changing this criteria, they are.
I don't
What is the
want to
purpose
speak
of
to
this given-
them specifically. It's their language is coming from the administration. I mean, ultimately it would, the 10-year loans would be opened up and, the landlord
fair
would be
market
able
rent.
to, right, they would be able to, presumably rent to, a significantly larger population of people.
Right.
Can I
I-
ask, I just want to make sure I know, how did this language make it in?
This was the language that came, this was the VHIP language that we're being asked to consider. These are the changes they're asking us to consider. We don't need to agree to them, that this is what the administration is asking.
Okay, I just didn't know if someone requested this
No.
section. Okay,
Well, we requested to put in the VHIP, the VHIP proposal, and this is what their proposal is. And it also comes with money, which is not in this bill at the moment, but I had thought it was 15. Well, I don't know why I wrote down at 15 million, but anyway. So that's a big change for public money. On the other hand, it would, right. And
I'd be open to talking about it and hearing maybe additional communities that would be, served, but I just think fair market rent right now is not particularly affordable for a lot of people. So, I'd be interested in including more categories like Section 8 recipients or something, but I don't know that I would support moving to
That was my question.
fair market rent.
I asked at the last session that I know he's still looking at, or the council is still looking at an answer to, and that is, what does fair market rent, as far as HUD, what does it consist of? Is there something that I can compare it to? Is it in fact fair based on what's being charged now, or what is it? What does it mean? How's it calculated? Can we see some examples of it?
right, and I would then also ask, because we also ask about area median income and that, and how do those all relate to, as we looked at, and the percents that we looked at with other rental, with other rents. So I think those are questions we have to answer. I think that Sean answered, I would like to have Sean come in and answer those questions and concerns, because we had him in, but I don't think we had,
Just from like Google sleuthing, it essentially says it's the 40th percentile of the area market, which we just know our market is really unaffordable for most people.
Exactly.
So I don't know if they have the figure by county or broken down further than that, but it is considered to be like what the 40th percentile of the local market is, according to HUD's website.
yeah. Pam, do we, to flush this out further, we need Sean and we need JFO and you?
I can do a little digging on my own, do a little bit of research. I definitely think the Department of, DHC is probably
And Alec.
more apt to be able to answer the questions, with their history and experience here, probably quicker than I could. But I will do a little research on my own as well.
That'd be great. I would just, I need to understand why they're asking for this a little bit more fully than I think we understood from Sean during his initial testimony. I'm not really there. So let's get that but they are big changes. So we had 3 big changes. Oh, I guess those are the 2 big changes.
Those are the 2. Yeah.
Is eliminating the 5-year loan option and only doing 5-year grants and 10-year loans. Although and then now Becky's here. Okay, great. The Commissioner of Labor, Randy, and everybody is fine with moving may to shall. And we'll let Sophie know that. Oh, thanks. You let Sophie know. That's great. Randy, did you hear that?
I heard it.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Kat. Good. So, let's move. Becky, welcome. We're going to move to section 6. And Becky Wasserman is here to joining us from the treasurer's office. And I don't know if you've seen, hi Becky, welcome. Good to see you. Is this your, no,
Hi, nice to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. We talked about this earlier. We made 2 changes for the credit, for the positive rental payment pilot program that the treasurers agreed to pilot. And we put $100,000 in for it. And we have changed the date of the report to November 1st of 2028. And we'd love to have you weigh in on this section.
Sure. So for the record, Becky Wasserman, Office of the State Treasurer. So we had reviewed the language, and I had sent legislative counsel. I sent Cameron some revised language. I'm not sure if the committee had discussed that, but I can generally give you our comments on it.
Yeah, I think we were generally accepting, you're running the pilot, accepting your language changes, but if you just share with us what they propose to do, that would be great.
And I'll say just real quick, Becky, this is Cameron. I didn't walk through the changes specifically. I said that you guys got back to me. You had some changes proposed, and I would asking if they would like me to insert that into the next draft, which I got approval to do, but I haven't walked through it in detail.
Great. Thanks for the context. So we just had a few sort of general changes, and I'm happy to speak to the specific language changes we provided. But generally speaking, we were looking to change any references in the section to be specific to a positive only reporting pilot. So what that means is rather than allowing for a pilot that a landlord could send in late evidence of late or non-payment of rent, the landlord would only be sending in, evidence of on-time rental payments or timely rental payments. So that was one of our big changes, and this is how the many of these pilots have been operating that we looked into, and sort of where the research shows that it has a big impact on tenants' credit scores. Another change that we suggested was sort of moving away from the use of our contracting just with an affordable housing provider. So we were hoping to make it a little broader in scope.
Right.
A little broader in scope, just to allow us flexibility to contract with rental property owners For example, we had had some conversations with the Vermont State Housing Authority about working with them to facilitate a pilot. So that would just give us a little more flexibility on who we could offer this pilot program to.
Good.
We had also just wanted to sort of tweak the language about contracting to clarify that, we would enter into the contract with a third party vendor, but that vendor who would be doing the working directly with landlords to be facilitating the credit reporting, and potentially, recruiting tenants, and just sort of working more directly with the landlords for sort of administrative purposes, and the treasurer's office wouldn't be administering the program at that level. And that is how the pilot worked in Colorado, for example. So we would like to mirror that model. Then the next comment we had was just about the mandatory financial education component. We are supportive of having a financial education component to the program, but would prefer if it was an option provided to tenants rather than a mandatory requirement in order to participate.
And sorry, I've lost you in this section. Where is the?
In the bill as drafted right now, I believe that is on page 17, line 16 through 18. In subsection E, it says, in order to participate, they have to complete a course. I think there's definitely value and research that says that having an optional financial education component would be helpful, but we're not sure that we want to make that a mandatory part.
So you don't want to have you don't want to shall complete a financial education, but may.
May offer an optional program for tenants.
Okay, great.
And then I think the other sort of general comment we had was just about the reporting. It sounded like you had changed the date for the final report. We would also support an interim report. So it's for a 2-year pilot, we would support providing an interim report 1 year in, just to kind of provide data on how the program is going to the legislature halfway through the program.
I think that's great. And you suggest that in sometime in 26 or January 27?
Let me just pull up what I had sent over.
27, Becky.
November of 27?
Yeah, November of 27.
Okay, great.
Oh, and I think just on that timing aspect, we did suggest moving forward the start date of the pilot, just because I think as currently drafted, it has the pilot starting January 1st of 2026. And I think just with the timing of going through an RFP process, I think we were hoping to have a little bit more time from when the bill would potentially pass to kind of going through that contracting process before having a pilot that actually is able to launch on January 1st of next year.
So what time are you suggesting?
I had suggested drafting it that we would have a contract in place by May 1st of 2026. So it could be before, on or before May 1st, hopefully before that. But I think it would be ambitious to go through an RFP process and negotiate a contract such that we could have a pilot up and running by January 1st.
Okay. That's over a year. I mean, we'll pass this in May. I mean, that'd be a year. I mean, surely.
Well, it would be like six months, like from June to, we'd have to go through the RFP process and be under contract by the end of December of this year in order to launch the pilot by January 1st. So, you know, I think we would hope for just a little more time to pick a vendor, and we'd also have to do go through the process of finding landlords and recruiting tenants, and I think that might take a little more time than you know, just 6 months to go through all of that.
Okay. So that's all in the language you've sent to Cam.
Correct.
Great. Perfect. Without objection, I think our committee was fine with including that. We're delighted that the treasurer's office is conducting this. Thanks.
Yeah, I saw Becky's changes when she sent them to Ledge Council, and I just want to thank Becky. You know, it's a little bit out of whole cloth that we're creating this program. We have a few states that are leading the way, but it's just without a lot of fanfare. Becky just kind of put a great program together that I think will help a lot of people improve their credit, which is a great financial tool that's essentially at very little cost to the state to help people feel economically empowered. So I'm just appreciative to the treasurer's office.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. It's Colorado and California, right, that have done the pilots?
Colorado, California, Massachusetts, the Finance Housing Agency recently launched a pilot that I'm aware of. And I'm blanking on if there was another one that we had in our report, but those were the ones we had. Oh, and Fannie Mae also did a pilot that just ended, a 3-year pilot that just ended at the end of December.
Right.
And I would just note for the committees, you know, just a policy decision for the committee. In our report, we had suggested an opt-in pilot so that tenants opt into the into participation. I know, for example, the Champlain Housing Trust has an opt-out program. So, you know, I think there are pros and cons to both for the committee's consideration. You may get more tenant involvement if it's an opt-out process, but you know, and we're flexible to that. But we had originally suggested an opt-in.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Because opt-out, you do tend to get more people, which would be. Well, we can discuss it once we see this language. So currently, it's an opt-out.
I don't know that the language is specific to it. I just wanted to kind of note that if you do want to make it specific in the program design about whether you want it opt-in or opt-out. And I don't know, you know, I don't know what the, you know, I just wanted to highlight that there could be some, you know, pros and cons to however it's designed.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
I would just say, Madam Chair, like with Vermont Saves and some of the other programs, we ultimately made them opt out, but it might be good to start with opt in for proof of concept, you know, that it's like as a pilot. I think we don't want people to find out, you know, that they were part of some pilot against their will or knowledge.
Well, yeah. Thank you. That's great. Okay. Starting with an opt-in might be fine. So we look forward to seeing that language in the next draft. And we have Alex Farrell back in the room, which is very helpful because Becky, thank you very much. And
thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for creating this, as Keisha said, out of whole cloth. Thank you. We have Alex here, and Alex, come join us, right? Sure. Okay. Come sit in Tom's seat. We're talking about VHIP and the changes and what your objective is and why you want these changes in the VHIP program from a 5-year loan, now just 5-year grants, and now just 10-year forgivable loans with no requirement to have people exiting homelessness and only to have them at fair market rent, which is fairly high at the moment.
Sure.
So we're just curious, I think, is that fair, committee, or those are questions?
Well, it would be good, someone has to know what, say, fair market rent is in Burlington or Barry right now for us to know how affordable it is. But I worry that if it's the 40th percentile of the area's rents, then that doesn't sound particularly affordable right now.
Right. So those are our concerns, and why get rid of some options other than administrative ease.
Well, sure. So this, and to clarify, this. Oh, that's right. For the record, Alex Farrell, Commissioner at the Department of Housing and Community Development. And right off the bat, you can tell how much taller Tom is than Senator Chittenden is than I am, because I'm falling below the.
You can pop it up.
No, that's okay. I won't change the seat. So I should clarify that this is actually just a reversion to how the legislature designed the program. There was a language change at late last session that we, nor us, nor AHS, or any of the homeownership centers were afforded the opportunity to testify on, which I think the folks who requested the change have since had the logic revealed to them that it doesn't actually make sense to have the same requirement for both a 10-year and a 5-year. Because then no one would ever opt for the 10-year. You would just have, if you have to rehouse somebody exiting homelessness, whether it's a 5-year compliance period or 10, you just always do the 5-year compliance period. HUD fair market rents, I don't recall the actual calculation, but what I know is the reason we went with that is because the design of the program is to match Section 8 housing choice vouchers, because we're trying to create more units so that those can get used.
So the objective is to match Section 8 housing vouchers.
That is the standard that those utilize. And just for some context, especially for folks that are new to the committee here, Vermont actually gives back a lot of Section 8 vouchers every year because we don't have enough.
That's right. I remember this discussion, and this change we're hoping means we keep more of that money.
That's right. That's right.
That's coming back.
Yeah. So that was the original design of the program. Was you can either take the 5-year compliance period, which is a covenant on your property, and you shall serve somebody for 5 years who has exited homelessness, or you can opt for twice the length of time, but it is instead you are serving folks at the HUD fair market rents. And we've increased our efforts through the Vermont State Housing Authority to make sure that those properties and tenants with housing choice vouchers are matched up so that we're, like I said, maximizing Vermont's utilization of that money, especially at a time when we're worried about how many vouchers we may,
right.
Well, whether it's flat or reduced, we're worried. So we want to maximize those.
And do you have any sense, because it's Randy, I think we all have this concern, how vulnerable this money is?
Kathleen Burke from the Housing Authority would be better equipped to give an answer on that. I'd say we're more concerned than we've been in a long time, probably since the sequester of whatever year that was, 11, maybe 12. So yeah, very concerned.
Yeah.
Can I ask I don't know where we have questions.
Okay. Yeah.
Commissioner, I think the language is something about it shall not exceed fair market rent, but then if there's the inclusion of a voucher, it could exceed fair market rent. I don't know if that's standard for Section 8. It just seems like we'd still want to keep it, relatively low cost burden for low income people.
Right. I'll just read it for Thomas's sake because he's in the car. It says the total cost of rent for the unit, including utilities not covered by rent payments, shall not exceed the applicable fair market rent established by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, except the landlord may accept a housing voucher that exceeds fair market rent if available.
That's right. So there are circumstances in which the voucher actually it pays more than the HUD fair market rent. So this is just enabling the landlord to accept the increase from the voucher rather than say, no HUD, take your extra $30 a month back. So this wouldn't be raising the cost. It would be no change to the tenant. It would just be enabling the property owner to accept the full voucher.
Full HUD voucher,
Yeah, exactly.
Section 8,
The housing choice voucher, yeah.
and not leaving any of that money.
Right. Again, Vermont is trying to not leave any federal money on the table. Thanks, Cameron.
Yeah.
Just so you know, for the committee, according to, one bedroom in Burlington, fair market rent is $14.76. For a 2-bedroom unit, it's $19.36.
This is HUD fair market value.
In Burlington. Yeah.
Now, when they talk about Burlington as an area, how big an area are they talking about?
Good question.
So unless Cameron has an answer, I need to go and look. So yeah, Senator, it's a great point because there are different programs that view the fair market rent areas differently. And Senator, your area is sometimes to its detriment included, well, depending on detriment or benefit, depending on which party you're thinking of, is sometimes lumped in with the Burlington MSA. So on occasion, Chittenden County, Grand Isle, and Franklin County are all lumped into the Burlington area MSA. Metro.
I have a great deal of difficulty thinking that Richford has the same rent that Burlington does.
Well, right. So,
but the Upper Valley has the same, it has very similar rent challenges to Burlington.
This is true. So, but I'm not saying that is necessarily the case in the standard being utilized by the program. I want to, and Cameron, maybe you would know, perhaps not off the top of your head. Sean Gilpin would be able to give you a better sense.
The context of this that I was raising is that we have in what was presented to us, that we're using this as a measure of what we do regarding rentals. And the only question is, does it make sense for us? Because we know, I think perhaps, I think better than HUD does based on its performance, what fair rent ought to be. And the question is, are we giving money away? Or are we taking, or are we charging too much?
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, in most cases, just about all cases, HUD fair market rents are going to be below market rents. Right. So it's not going to be the market rent of the area. It's a standard that's supposed to be pegged to.
Do we know how much less these HUD rates are than current market value?
That's beyond an answer I can give you right now. Sean Gilpin may be able to give you some sense there, or I could find an expert that could.
That we can. Sure.
Okay.
So I guess the question that I really have in including that in legislation is if we know, based on our experience, that information is just flat wrong, why are we putting it in the statute?
I don't think we should operate with that assertion, or with that assumption rather.
Right.
Well, that's why I'm asking the question. You know, I instinctively, and based on what I've heard, we've heard it's not necessarily a good number. It's not applicable in all the areas to which it's being pegged, and yet we're putting it in a statute. We're guiding ourselves by it. And my question is why?
I don't think I'm not sure that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that the market rate is considerably higher than the HUD fair market rate.
Well, that may be in Burlington,
in all cases,
Richford, and so on. The areas, for example, don't have the same market rates.
You're concerned about the areas and how
correct
and what it applies to.
You're basing, you know, this what is the fair market rate for a 2-bedroom apartment with, and so on and so forth. It's different in Burlington than it is in Richford, than it is in Grand Isle. And it may be materially different.
But below what the market rate is in the Upper Valley. I mean, I can, you know, all these two figures that are just being discussed are way below market rate in the Upper Valley. I can't imagine that they're below. I mean, I can't believe that we'd all have to then go anyway.
Again, just to go back, I do not believe the situation where I described, where there are some programs where Franklin County gets lumped in with Burlington. Senator, I do not believe is the case for the standard we're using here. And you know, if the concern is that we're charging too much, and so it's not serving lower income people, we have not had trouble filling units with VM.
Well, I guess, you know, is getting an answer to that question of what are we talking about with this HUD market rate and how accurate is it and what does it apply to? That's really,
Okay.
those questions could be very helpful to us.
Yeah.
Right, but I think this has been helpful. Thank you, Alex, for coming back. I don't know where you were lingering, but thank you for returning. And while we have Alex, anything further you'd like to ask him, committee? Because we're past time. I know, I appreciate that. Is there anything else you'd like to ask our commissioner, which we have this precious resource here? Who, anything else on their, because they.
I guess I'd ask something if I could, Madam Chair.
Yes, Thomas.
And I know we're over time, so if you want to come
Okay.
back and speak to it otherwise, but I am hearing from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, they want to speak about the tier 2 HIT or CHIP, whatever we're calling it now. And I would just try to overlay that with the Spark program and to make sure that these initiatives can access rural communities. If the commissioner has anything from the earlier conversation around Spark and making sure that some of these housing improvement programs that are TIF-like related can make sure that they're accessible to the whole state. Any thoughts that he might have from building on the earlier conversation would be very welcome.
Because we're going to be discussing this tomorrow with several people, so it would be great to have your input on this. Then we'll get additional.
Can we, I don't want to beat around the bush because this is somebody who, you know, has been valuable to the committee in helping us calculate this. And that's Zeke Davison, you know, without, like, I texted him and I haven't heard back yet, but I'd like to just invite him to speak because, you know, it's not, you know, Northeast Kingdom and Middlebury, really different, right? Like, so we're trying to make it work for towns of all sizes. And I think this deserves a lot of our attention because in my mind, it's the only thing that's like really going to develop housing and infrastructure.
So who are you suggesting, Keisha?
Zeke Davison.
Oh, Zeke again. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And with that, I have to run.
Well, I think both Laura Lee and Zeke would be great, and VLCT, all three. Good. Thank you. Anything further? Any other questions for Alex while we have him?
Well, and I can respond.
Oh yeah, to Tom. Yes, sorry.
Sure. I know you're.
Thomas, hold on. I'm getting an answer.
Well, and I can be brief in that, you know, I'm not sure we need to constrain this program too much geographically. So, you know, I know there's, you know, contemplation of, is it restricted to just 1A or perhaps 1A and 1B?
And 2?
That's right. So I'm not really sure within the program design, within the statute, we ought to be constraining it geographically. I think the other aspects of the program and the way it's vetted, Betsy, et cetera, will be sufficient to vet the viability of the project. I think that's really more how we should be measuring this, not
Jessica's coming tomorrow too.
Jessica, that's perfect. Okay. So she can speak to this as well.
Great. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you. I don't think we should be limiting it. I think that the towns that are appropriate should be applying it. And developers were willing to work it instead. I mean, I don't think there should be a limit.
Well, and I'm sure as you'll want to share with your colleagues, you know, the towns that are actually in most need of this are the ones that will struggle the most to obtain, certainly 1A and to some extent 1B designations. And even beyond that, it's actually going to be the areas outside of there that we need.
I think it's the areas in 2 that are probably going to need some of this more. I mean, 1B for me, 1B and 2 are the real concerns here.
I completely agree.
Thank you for that. There's chocolates in that drawer if you want any, Commissioner.
And up on the mantle. Don't forget the mantle. I think unless there's another question for Alex or Cam, I think we may be done for the day. I think we've done well. Thank you. I think any last comment, committee?